Things.com. That's it. Another one in the books.
Stay safe, everybody.
Bye.
Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow, where we take a deeper look into how the issues of today will impact the world of tomorrow. From politics and world news to media and technology, we discuss how today's headlines are becoming tomorrow's reality.
Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow. This is episode 20. Don't touch that dial. I'm your host, Joseph Whalen, and my co-host today, Sam Whalen. How you doing today, Sam?
Good. How you doing?
Fantastic. So this topic kind of came up when I was doing some research on various things that we could talk about. This one kind of hit home, mainly because of what you do. What is it that you do that's tied to this topic?
So I currently am a producer at an AM radio station. I run the board for a bunch of different shows 3 days a week. I also would like to break into the FM market at some point. That's sort of my goal. Went to college for it, did radio in college, did radio in high school. Radio is my passion, and it's what I want to do for a living. This topic was important and something I think about too often.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the resume there. We'll make sure we get
no
that
problem.
out to everyone.
Check out my website.
So the article that I came across happened to deal with current automakers like BMW, Tesla, Audi, Porsche, and Volvo, all taking steps to remove AM radios from their electric vehicles. And it made me think, and it's making a lot of people think, what's the fate of this aging but reliable form of communication? And that's what we're going to discuss today. But before we do that, I did want to take a moment to invite our listening and viewing audience to subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Tomorrow. You can find video and audio of all the network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things. And we're pretty much anywhere you can get a podcast these days: Apple, Spotify, Google, and so forth. I would also invite you to write in, give us your feedback, tell us how we're doing. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. You can find us on Twitter at insights_things, or you can find links to all of our social media on our main website at www.insightsintothings.com. Shall we get into it?
Let's get into it.
Let's do it. So there's one particular article that I read was on a site, northjersey.com. And they kind of talk about the fact that it's no secret that AM radio has kind of lost much of its luster over the decades. It was introduced in the early 1900s, and it's lost out to superior technologies, FM being the first one that threatened it, satellite radio, and now we're talking, podcasts and streaming and YouTube and everything you can get over the internet now. In fact, that's one of the things that these car companies are saying, is that everything that you could get over AM, you can get over streaming now in the car, which I guess is a valid point as long as that infrastructure is working, right? AM has been traditionally relegated mostly to talk shows at this point in time. And again, that's because of the limitations in the technology. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with AM and what the limitations of that technology are and why people might be wanting to move away from it?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if you listen to any AM broadcast, you're going to hear it immediately. The difference between AM and FM, the sound quality is just much lower, and that's has to do a lot with how it transmits its signal. It limits itself essentially, but because it's so simple, it's effective in more rural areas and areas where you might not have the high-speed internet you would need for streaming services. But again, because of those limitations, like you said, we are mostly talk because, like, anything more complicated, you just wouldn't hear it because it's, as it's broadcasted, it's all garbled, and talk is the only thing that really can come through effectively. But yeah, it's kind of a miracle that AM is still around. I think, even as someone that works at an AM station, it is definitely, it feels like a relic. And when you bring it up to anybody, you immediately they're like, it's dated and it feels dated. But there is still a market for it in areas where it's not as populated, where it's easy to get an AM signal. We do have people that call in still. We do have listeners, even with those limitations. So,
Well, and that's the technology itself doesn't lend itself to high fidelity broadcast, stereo, or all the new fangled high grade music and stuff that we do now. But what it is, it's reliable and it transmits very far. It doesn't, because of the frequencies that it operates on, it's not as susceptible to interference with, objects, Wi-Fi, for instance. You run Wi-Fi in your house, and if you have drywall in your house, that can interfere with your Wi-Fi signals because of the higher frequencies.
And weather too.
Yes, that's one thing. But I will say that from a weather standpoint, it's interesting listening to AM radio in a thunderstorm because every time there's a bolt of lightning, you can hear it over the radio.
Yep.
But it's exactly that reliability that resulted in it becoming really America's backbone for our national public warning system, which is one of the paramount reasons that people are trying to preserve it now, not just, for talk radio and such, but a large chunk of our emergency broadcast system is done over AM radio. In fact, our government is still trying to preserve this. U.S. Congressman Josh Geitheimer thinks we can't lose AM radio. He says AM radio is resilient to cyber attacks, nuclear threat, and natural disasters. He goes on to say that when cell phones go out, the internet gets cut off, or television doesn't work because there's no power in your house, you can still use an AM radio. It'll still be there.
Yep.
And that's true. I mean, people have hand crank AM radios for emergency weather services and natural disasters and things like that. How significant do you think it would be if AM went away and we lost those forms of communication? Would it be a public health hazard?
I think it definitely could be because, I mean, when all else fails, you would still be able to turn to that. Everybody, even if they've never tuned to AM on their car or radio before, you can, and you would still be able to get that information. If that goes away, there really is no no like last resort that you'd be able to go to get that information. You could, we get government warnings on our phones, but if there's some kind of electrical malfunction, your phone is dead. And there's no cell service, no internet service. You're not going to get those alerts. TV broadcasts, you see emergency alert system tests on TV all the time. But again, if power goes out or if the TV networks go out, you're going to lose that service. AM radio, it's pretty hard to shut it down unless you destroy the transmitting towers because no matter what, it's going to go out. And like you said, you can get a hand cranked radio to always get that signal. So I think it would be, it seems like a really low chance that we'd have to use it for something. But if we did and we didn't have it, the consequences would be pretty rough.
Well, and, I'll take us back to when 9/11 happened. I was working up in central New Jersey, so most of the radio and TV stations that we had pulled from New York. And when the first tower went down, it took one of the major transmitting stations for all the television networks down.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and because it was mounted on top of the tower, because it was the largest structure in the city. And we lost all of the antenna service that we had at the time. We didn't have cable; we had antenna service, and obviously it's a time that everyone's kind of scared, not knowing what's going on. So you're looking to get news. Well, all the internet sites were hammered at the time. You couldn't get anything. In fact, the only internet news we could get, we had to go to European sites to get that, and they had, spotty reporting at best. We had someone who had an old 9-volt radio in their desk that they would listen to on their break. And they pulled that out, they pulled up an AM news station, and that was how we kept in touch during 9/11. So it's not that unreasonable to think that it's that important. And it's, the whole reason this topic came up was because of the auto industry kind of pushing the issue itself. But that's not really the driving force behind this, but it's the reasoning behind the auto industry's move away from AM is sketchy, I would say at best. What are the reasonings that they have for moving away from AM?
So I'm looking at the show notes. I'm just trying to make sure we covered the right parts. We already covered the issues, but yeah, the real issue is deeper than car makers trying to modernize their products. This is from Forbes magazine. 40% of all radio listening is done in cars, which is great for us and the radio side of things because you're guaranteed an audience. A lot of, like when you do ratings and stuff, you can't guarantee an audience, but radio, you can kind of cheese the numbers because everyone's got a radio in their car. Even if they're not really listening, it's on. So that counts when it comes to ratings.
Sure, yeah.
If the auto industry turns away from AM, losing that large percentage of listeners could doom the platform and make it impossible to stay commercially viable, which is also very true because in radio, it all comes down to your ratings so that you can sell advertising to then go back into the station to fund more things. It's a cycle. And ratings are everything. If you don't have those ratings and you don't have that market, you've pretty much got no reason to be operational because it is all commercial based, even if it is being used for government services. Bipartisan groups of elected leaders have sponsored the AM for Every Vehicle Act, which I imagine is, a bill to force AM in every car, no matter what.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think that would be a good thing, because even if you never use it, like you said, when it comes to 9/11, having it in a time like that would be extremely useful and helpful. And if there was no option for that, I don't know what you would do. I think it would make panic even worse than it probably already would be.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think it's almost like a safety blanket at this point in time. People know that if they need to get that information, they can, even though they might not avail themselves of it on a regular basis. There's thousands and thousands of weather radios out there that people have just when there's a storm, and those weather radios get their information over an AM band.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the things that the auto industry is claiming is that because of the electrical emissions from electrical vehicles, it causes interference over AM radios, and they don't want a negative experience for their users
that are listening to AM radio.
That
Like that Venn diagram is pretty small.
That's a very good point. Is that the fact that they've got people that are listening to AM radios are clearly not looking for a high fidelity signal to begin with.
Yeah, I don't think, like I said, the Venn diagram of electric car users and AM radio listeners are that in between is, I would argue, probably non-existent.
and I would tend to agree with that as well. So, and that's why I say I think their motivation for it's to save money, but I can't imagine that putting an AM capable radio in an electric vehicle is the cost center.
Well, it's also probably because they want to have a deal with satellite radio companies, because most times when you buy a car now, it's got Sirius built into it, Sirius XM.
Well, yeah, but my vehicle has Sirius built into it. They didn't have to not have AM on it.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why they wouldn't do it. Maybe if it's I don't think it's an electrical interference problem. I just don't buy that.
I don't either, and that's almost like one of those things where they don't want you to use your cell phone on an airplane because it interferes with telemetry. And it's like, yes, if under certain circumstances there's a 1 in a million chance that it interferes with it, you probably don't want that chance happening on a plane. I can't imagine there being anything detrimental about an AM radio that's just receiving, not transmitting, on an electric vehicle.
Yeah, and like I have a AM radio transmitter hooked up to my stereo, or a receiver hooked up to my stereo, and it's just like a square piece of plastic with wire wrapped around it. That's all you need to get AM signal. It's not like you need a full stereo or radio head to get it.
Right.
You just need some wire that you stick out.
And it's funny you mention that, because during that 9/11 situation, the radio that we had was not getting a very good signal. So we actually took a piece of coax,
Yep.
stripped all the shielding off of it, and just turned that into a bigger antenna and got a clearer signal.
Yeah, and like that's one of the reasons I love radio so much. Not just AM. I don't really love AM that much, but FM, radio in general. The concept of radio, it's so accessible, and I've always equated it to like sticking your hand in a river. Like the radio is always there, and there's so many ways to access it. And you could have a big boombox that you tune your favorite station to, but you can also have something in the palm of your hand that can do the same thing. And I just think like you don't really get that with any other medium. Not to mention it's very like personable. Like when you're listening to a DJ, it feels like it's just you and them having a conversation, and you don't get that with TV or movies.
Sure.
And I think AM does have that, and that's another reason why talk is so successful on AM when it is because you can access it in a variety of ways that are pretty easy, and you don't have to pay to listen to the radio. Like you don't have to pay a subscription fee. You can just have a wire and stick it up in the air and have some sort of output, and you're listening. There's no barrier to entry, and that's one of the reasons I love it so much. And it's so accessible no matter where you are in life. I just think it's great.
Well, and it's funny because there's been a push by politicians to declare internet as a public utility. Everyone needs to have internet. And I don't want to argue with that. I mean, that's our medium of choice
Sure.
for the podcast. And I think everyone should have it. But if everyone should have the internet as a public service, everyone should have AM. AM already exists. Why would you take it away?
And it's much easier to give everybody access to AM than it is internet.
Absolutely.
Because the less populated areas you get, it's way harder to get that internet working. I have a friend of mine who lives in Maine, and his two choices for internet were Spectrum or like satellite internet, which is way worse.
Right.
And the delay in that is insane. And this is in 2023, and he's not even in like a rural area. It's just in Maine.
Yeah.
There's still parts of the country where you're not getting 5G, upload speeds and things like that. And, that's going to be a problem for many more years to come. They're not going to have that ironed out. Certainly not in a way that it works as reliably as AM does now.
Well, and that's sort of what the auto industry is kind of counting on is people getting this information over the internet. And the problem with the model of the internet is it's cost centric to the consumer, where if you want the internet, you have to pay for it in some form, either through taxes, through direct subscriptions or whatever. Whereas AM is producer centric. So if someone wants to produce content and put it out on radio, they have to fund it. They fund it through through listenership and through advertising, but there's no cost, like you said, to the consumer at that point in time. So it makes it accessible to low-income people, to seniors, to everybody out there who doesn't have unlimited income and free disposable income.
And going back to that accessibility thing, it's pretty easy to understand. It's a dial.
Sure. You flip it on and you turn it to where you want to listen to something.
Yeah, and it's just I don't think there's any other like medium of communication that's like it, and I think that's the reason it's still around. It's people say the radio industry is dying, and I don't think it's dying. I think it's just changing. I think it's evolving. But I think the core technology of how FM and AM transmission works, I think there's always going to be a place for that as long as, broadcasting towers still exist.
Well, the fact that you have podcasts that have become so popular tells me that the content that comes over AM is still popular. The media may be changing,
Right.
but that content is still deliverable. It's ease of use, it's low cost, and it's accessible to everybody. It makes a lot of sense to keep it around for people who aren't high tech and have disposable income to pay for the content that they're looking for. There's a market for all the other stuff, and there's nothing to take away from that. But AM still serves a huge portion of the public, and I think it's probably worthwhile to keep it around.
Yeah, absolutely.
On that note, I think we're going to take our first break, and we'll come back and we'll talk about why AM is so important. We'll be right back. For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community,
both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to Insights into Tomorrow. Today we're talking about AM radio and the value of it in today's modern world. So in this segment, we're going to talk about why AM radio is so important. Like I said at the top of the show, I am a producer at an AM radio station, so you can take that however you want. They're not paying me to say this, though. They're barely paying me to work. So some members of the right-leaning media, such as Sean Hannity, suggest the phasing out of AM could be a conspiracy to silence conservative voices. And boy, does that sound like a narrative we've heard before. Many right-leaning talk shows that are the key to the Republican base live on AM. That's very, very true. A lot of the shows that I run are like that. And they are just more popular than a lot of the other shows we get. Because they have that built-in audience, essentially. Why would we have a note in here about Elon Musk? Isn't Elon Musk emerging as a leader of the right? Why would Tesla be participating in this conspiracy? That's a good point. Elon clearly is on the right side when it comes to the political spectrum. Going back to the EV vehicles wanting to get rid of AM radio, why would he be doing that if it's a constant echo chamber for right-leaning ideas? I don't know. That's a good question. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't. It makes me go back to the thought that it's a cost savings thing, but I don't know how you're saving money on it by getting rid of it. What other motivation would he have other than making sure that other medium, he owns Twitter too. So maybe it's a way of trying to make sure that the mediums that he favors more are at the forefront, removing. And I don't want to get into conspiracy theories here, but one of the things that right-leaning side of the country seems to think is that if they eliminate options for people and the only options that you have left to adopt are the options that they want you to adopt, then you obviously wind up following their indoctrination.
Right.
Is this a factor of that? I doubt it. I think that's kind of a stretch, but I think it's more of a technology thing. Like, I don't even know what kind of radio a Tesla has at this point in time because it's a computer interface that it has.
Yeah, I have no idea. But I could see Elon being more of the mind of, there's a ton of right-wing stuff on like YouTube and their own sites that are getting plenty of traffic. And I could see Elon being completely fine with just moving past AM entirely to focus more on that digital side of things. Guys like I'm not even going to mention their names, but you know who they are, the guys that are, on that side of the spectrum that are online doing their shows. They're basically doing an AM talk radio show just on the internet, and they're getting way more eyes on than they would ever get on AM. So I could see Elon just being of the mindset that AM is dead and we'll just move on from it.
Well, and let's be honest, the format that we do on this show here is very well suited, with the exception of the video, obviously, but it's very well suited to being on an AM radio station. Which is why I say, like, the most popular podcasts that are out there today are really an AM podcast. They're an AM talk show that happens to be on the internet. So there isn't a lack of demand for what AM offers from a format standpoint. Is it just a technology thing?
I mean, yeah. Once again, we go back to this issue of technology. Jordan Walton, executive director of the New Jersey Broadcasters Association, tells us, due to the nature of the sound, AM lends itself to the spoken word, which is why the talk shows gravitate toward it, which is true. When I'm producing shows, we are very aware that we are spoken word when it comes to things like compression rate and what we're uploading our shows at. It really doesn't matter that much because when it's processed through the transmitter, it's going to sound like it sounds on AM no matter what we do to it. Hundreds of foreign language stations on the platform serve marginalized communities, which is also very true. I run a lot of shows dealing with Eastern European communities in the area, Ukrainian people, Polish people. And that was an aspect of the radio industry that I had no idea about before I started this job. And it's really opened my eyes to it, how important it is to these communities to have that access. I mean, holding full-on religious services that through the AM dial that they might not be able to get to otherwise, it's a big deal, and it's in those communities. It is still very active, and of course, nearly 47 million Americans listen to AM, which is a lot of people. And if that just happened to go away, that's 47 million people that just lose access to that platform.
Yeah, and I go back to when I was a kid. You know, my grandmother lived with us. She was from, as my mother used to term it, the old country. She was from Lithuania, and she didn't speak English very well, didn't understand English very well. So she was very self-conscious going out in public because she couldn't communicate. There happened to be at the time a radio station, a local AM radio station that she would listen to that was done, I don't know if it was done in Lithuanian, but it was done in a language that she understood. And that was like her connection to the outside world. She would get religious services through it. She would get news through it. It was a friendly voice that she didn't hear unless she was talking to members of her own community. And that level of cultural sensitivity, I think, is very important to maintain for those marginalized people.
Absolutely. I mean, some of the shows that we run are entirely in other languages, entirely in Polish or entirely in Ukrainian. And, you know, I don't speak those languages, but somebody's listening because otherwise they wouldn't be on the air.
Right. So, and as with everything, cost is still a factor. You know, as a platform, AM's comparatively inexpensive, certainly to produce and create content for. AM's also the great equalizer across drastically divergent economic situations. From a millionaire to a Porsche, from a millionaire in a Porsche to a homeless person with a battery radio, anyone can tune in, is the quote that I found.
And that's kind of what I talked about earlier, the accessibility of it. There's no subscription fee. As long as you have a way to receive the transmission, because they're all around you. You know, you can't see them, obviously, but, you know, FM signals and AM signals are all around you. As long as you've got a way
You can't see them. I can see them.
I think you got to see a doctor. As long as you've got a way to receive that, you can access it. And I think that's a wonderful thing.
You're absolutely right. And again, talking about your friend who's in Maine and other people, you know, you've got farmers and seniors and immigrants who all rely on it because it's a cheap cost of entry into getting into these areas, these discussions. You don't need any high-tech gear. You don't need any advanced knowledge of computers. You literally flip a button, turn it on, turn the knob to where you want to go, and it's there. So that accessibility makes it appealing to a lot of people. Probably the most significant reason AM is important, again, we touched on earlier, is a means of emergency communication. Severe weather alerts, Amber alerts, and other emergency broadcasts all go out over AM frequencies. Now, a lot of those you can get over your cell phone now too, but in times of emergencies, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, the technology required to make the internet work, and you know, full disclosure, I think everyone knows by now, I work in technology, I work with the internet. The fact that it works as well as it does is a miracle. There are so many points of failure that can stop the internet from working, especially when you're talking about cell signals, that in times of a natural disaster, it's literally the first thing to go down. FEMA has spent decades building out its integrated public alert warning system, or its IPAWS system, using somewhere in the range of 77 primary emergency alerting stations around the country that are AM-based stations. So you've got a huge infrastructure for emergency broadcasting that's already been invested by the country to build this out, and it works. I think that's my biggest catch is there's no reason not to use it. It's not like it's failing. It's not like our crumbling road infrastructure where bridges are literally falling down within driving distance of us here. This works. The technology is sufficient enough to do the job that it's doing, and there's no reason not to use it. The stations brought vital information, warnings, and comfort during tragedies like hurricanes and earthquakes, and again, in the wake of 9/11. So I can't think of a compelling reason for AM to go away. The fact that it's an old technology shouldn't be a reason. The wheel is an old technology, and that's not going away because it's thousands of years old, right?
Yeah, I don't really see why you'd get rid of it. I mean, it still works. It's worked essentially the same way for like 100 years at this point. I forget when it was invented. I think in the early 1900s, but like it still works, especially when it comes to things like this. Why would you get rid of it? And what is the alternative? Really, like, is there a plan from these automakers for? I guess they don't really. It's not their problem if AM radios are done away with. What the alternative would be for these kind of emergency broadcasts?
No, it's not. And their solution to this is use an app. And I'm sorry, but there isn't an app for the emergency broadcasting system. There isn't an app that works when the internet goes down or your cellular connection goes down. The technology of the internet and it's ironic because when the concept of the internet came out after Sputnik launched, the idea was to move away from circuit switched telephone networks that could be taken out in a nuclear strike to a packet switch network which can route around outages on the network. So the whole premise of the internet was to have a redundant system of communication that didn't go down during emergencies. And the first thing that goes down in times of emergencies is your local internet connection. Mm-hmm. Like it happens every time. You know, we have gusty storms here and our cable internet goes out or the power goes out. And it's like there's so many things that an internet connection is dependent on that if any one of those goes down, whether it's your power at your house, your router, the wire to your house, the wire on the street, the wire back to the central office, there's so many things that could go out that would take down your internet. And if you think about the technology for AM, what do you have? You have the radio station and their antenna. Mm-hmm. They're the only two things that you need. And you could set up a portable AM radio broadcasting station within an hour of a natural disaster. Mm-hmm. So the level of redundancy isn't anywhere near where it is with AM.
Yeah, just like a personal anecdote. I remember there was one time when I was younger, we got stuck in traffic somewhere. It was like standstill traffic. And the first thing you did was tune to AM.
That was the New Jersey Turnpike, the Pennsylvania Turnpike coming back from Hershey.
Yep. And the first thing you did was you tuned to one of our local AM stations to get the traffic. And they did traffic and weather like every 20 minutes, maybe less than that, every 15 minutes. But that was the first thing it did because it was reliable, and we might not at the time had, as up-to-date, Google Maps as we do now, but it was a way that you knew that you could count on to get that information pretty much immediately and effectively, and it worked without any kind of issue.
Yeah, so I don't think there's a huge danger of AM going away. What concerns me more is the fact that you have manufacturers that are marginalizing it now. It's one thing to lose market share to a superior technology when the product that you're trying to consume, like music, relies on that superior technology. If you listen to a radio, the same song on AM and on FM, you can hear the difference. Mm-hmm. Losing market share to that is understandable because you're getting a higher quality product.
Right.
Losing market share just because some auto manufacturer decides that they don't want to put a radio in your car anymore, that's pretty arbitrary at that point in time. And you're taking the choice out of the hands of the consumer at that point.
Yeah, and again, we've hit this a bunch, but like it doesn't cost that much. It can't cost that much. I have an FM and AM receiver hooked up to my stereo, and it's just 2 wires. Like I don't understand like what the argument. It's not like it's costing hundreds of thousands of dollars to install these devices in cars. It can't cost that much, and it's just like, why get rid of it? I don't understand it.
Yeah, no, I agree. We're going to take another break here, and we come back. We're going to talk about how it can be saved, because we're not the only ones that think it should be. There are other people, fortunately, in positions of power who think it should be saved. We'll be back in a minute.
Insights into Entertainment, a podcast series taking a deeper look into entertainment and media. Our husband and wife team of pop culture fanatics are exploring all things from music and movies to television and fandom. We'll look at the interesting and obscure entertainment news of the week. We'll talk about theme park and pop culture news. We'll give you the latest and greatest on pop culture conventions. We'll give you a deep dive into Disney, Star Wars, and much more. Check out our video episodes at youtube.com/insightsintothings. Our audio episodes at podcast.insightsintoentertainment.com, or check us out on the web at insightsintothings.com.
Welcome back to Insights into Tomorrow. We're talking about AM radio and people fighting to get rid of it. Well, back in 2013, Ajit Pai of the FCC saw the problem looming and embarked on a personal quest to save it. After a little more than a year in the job, he urged the FCC to undertake an overhaul of the AM radio, which he called the audible core of our national culture. He sees AM as vital in emergencies and in rural areas. He goes on to say AM radio is localism, it's community. AM's longer wavelength means that it can be heard at far greater distances, and try that again. AM's longer wavelength means it can be heard at far greater distances, and so increases. He said AM radio is always going to be there. For example, he cited Fort Yukon, Alaska, where the AM station KZPA broadcasts inquiries about missing hunters and transmits flood alerts during the annual spring ice breakup. I can't imagine there being an app for that that's reliable out in Fort Yukon, Alaska.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you think about this? The chairman of the FCC is fighting for this.
Yeah, I mean, that's good. It's good that someone is. Ajit Pai is a questionable guy in most aspects of what he does politically, but this seems like something that is a positive thing that he's doing. It's good that he is sticking up for it, and, we'll see, if that continues and what his support would actually mean in terms of keeping AM radio around. But having the head of the FCC, or I don't think he's the head of the FCC.
Not
but
anymore. No.
when he was, still having him advocate for that. But, it's good to know that there are people higher up that are fighting for it for whatever reason. It's better to have it than not have it at all.
What about Congress? What's Congress doing for us?
So they are trying to save AM radio as well, with automakers threatening to pull the plug. A backlash by station owners, listeners, and legislators prompted Ford to announce it was reversing course on its previous announcement to stop installing AM radios in its cars. But with Tesla and the EV manufacturers announcing their intentions to phase out the technology, a congressional subcommittee was debating the merits of proposed legislation to make AM receivers standard equipment on new vehicles. So they just were talking about it, I guess. That's what it sounds like.
I think that's what politicians normally do.
Removing AM radios from cars could dramatically reduce the audience, with 74% of AM listening happening in the car, according to Nielsen. Automakers cite audio interference. We covered a little bit of this with electrical motors and the ability to stream stations as justification for phasing out the AM radios, which we already said the market for AM listeners and EV users is probably really small. The Communications and Technology Subcommittee of the Energy and Commerce Committee, the ECC, heard nearly 3 hours of testimony as to why AM should be saved. That must have been a long 3 hours.
I'll bet that was a real snore fest.
We mentioned this earlier, but the AM Radio for Every Vehicle Act would require, quote, dashboard access to any AM broadcast stations in a, quote, manner that is conspicuous to a driver. The primary rationale is AM radio's integral role in alerting the public of emergency situations as part of a national network. So again, it goes back to this thing of, if it's not broke, why do we get rid of it? And if it's something that we could use in an emergency where we can't really count on anything else, why get rid of it? And I think that's really what it comes down to. Even if, getting rid of the entertainment side of it, the talk radio side of it, at the end of the day, it is a utility, right? That it is used for emergency purposes. And it would be like getting rid of emergency alert systems in general. Something on that scale, like, these are important for in times of crisis, and it's something that is a reliable way to make sure that people get the information they need to know to stay safe. Why would we get rid of that?
I agree. And the subcommittee even goes on to talk about what we had discussed earlier, that there's a lot of programming on AM radio that'll have no place to go if AM dies a quicker than natural death. Mm-hmm. Of course, that's assuming that, there is a natural death in the future for AM to begin with. But Tesla hasn't been including AM radios in their vehicles for years.
I didn't know that.
And now a number of other manufacturers are kind of following suit there. They claim the electromagnetic interference from batteries generates an audible high-frequency hum for AM broadcast signals. What doesn't generate an audible high-frequency hum on AM? Everything does.
Yep.
But it's been around for over 120 years now. Everyone's gotten used to it at this point in time.
Right.
It's literally, microwave background radiation from the cosmos generates it, okay? I don't think your car is going to overpower that.
Yeah.
But when Ford announced that they would stop putting AM radios in, somebody finally perked up and took notice. Ford CEO Jim Farley said after speaking with policy leaders about the importance of AM broadcast radio as part of the emergency alert system, we've decided to include it in all of 2024 Ford and Lincoln vehicles.
It's a great quote. Like, we forgot about the emergency alert system part. I guess we'll put them in.
Yeah, at least they realized it. But the longer term future for AM kind of is up in the air there still. They're only doing it in their 2024 line. Clearly that's not a long-term plan of theirs. So we need more.
Yeah.
So what more do we have?
A petition.
There's a petition out there for everything, right?
They always work.
So change.org Save AM Radio, a part of the emergency alert system petition, has been put up by WABC Radio, actually.
Like the ABC?
Yeah.
Oh, how about that?
Yeah, as if they had some kind of stake in the race or something here. Again, they're pushing the fact that for emergency purposes, because, we're getting more and more weather events,
Yep.
which means there's more and more need for this. Again, is it profit for them that they're pushing this to keep it around because they make money off of AM?
I've been trying to find a way to articulate this, but I really do think it goes back to the issue of satellite radio, right? Because I think they probably see AM as not profitable and not worth having in the car. I don't think they really consider the emergency alert aspect of it. But I think if they have a partnership with Sirius where Sirius pays them and they pay Sirius to have Sirius XM in the car when you buy it, I think that is, I think there's something to be said there of why they're pushing to get rid of AM so hard. FM is going to be a tougher sell because people do still pretty regularly listen to FM radio, but I think it starts by getting rid of AM.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that, but I don't know if satellite radio is a replacement for AM.
Well, not in a realistic sense, but I think in terms of profitability sense for them, for the manufacturers.
From that standpoint, yeah, but from an emergency alert system itself, I don't think it's reliable enough for that.
No. Not to mention you have to pay a subscription for it. So
and that's the thing. Like what someone like XM could do would be to provide a channel that anyone can access for emergency regions.
Yep.
The problem that you have with that is your emergency broadcast system is regionalized.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to have a single channel for emergency broadcast, Fort Yukon, Alaska is going to be sending me updates of hunters that are missing and breaking up with their ice cap, and it's not going to be relevant to me.
Yeah, not to mention, I don't know how you would access that without having Sirius installed in your car.
And that's the thing. Standard radios can't receive it, whereas literally any standard AM radio can receive an AM broadcast.
Right.
You can get add-ons, that will do. You can get an AM or a XM tuner that then broadcasts an FM signal that you can pick up, which is what a lot of people did for satellite radio when it first came out.
Mm.
But again, it's ease of use. That's not available to everybody, so I don't think it's probably the best way to go about it either.
Yep.
I don't know. I guess time will tell where we are with it, but we're going to take another break here and come back. We're going to talk about why AM is fading and some detailed information on that. We'll be right back.
Insights into Teens, a podcast series exploring the issues and challenges of today's youth. Talking to real teens about real teen problems. Explore issues from braces to puberty, social anxiety to financial responsibility. Each week, we talk about the topics concerning today's youth. We look at how the issues affect teens, how to cope with these issues, and how parents, friends, and loved ones can help teens handle these challenges. Check out our video episodes on youtube.com/insightsintothings. Catch our audio versions on podcast.insightsintoteens.com or on the web at insightsintothings.com.
So is AM radio dying? Well, AM listenership has been in decline for years now. It's been losing ground to cleaner sounds of FM radio and more recently satellite radio and digital media like podcasts.
Mm-hmm. Make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube, everybody.
I guess that makes us part of the problem. But there's over 4,500 AM radio stations nationwide and about 82 million listeners each month. About a third of the audiences for terrestrial radio, according to Nielsen. I didn't realize it was that large. I mean, that's a pretty significant amount, especially when you start talking about advertising revenue.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see how that maps out on a region, like on a map, you know, like where a lot of these people are concentrated in, if it is more rural areas or if it's more spread out. If I had to wager, I'd say it's probably more like open areas where it's, you know, more popular because it's a reliable form that you can always access.
Well, the research that I did says in Chicago, AM listeners represent 48% of the total monthly radio audience. Just skimming here.
Yeah, it's a lot of numbers.
Yeah, I love stats, but I don't like picking up numbers. It's tied to Milwaukee and second only to Buffalo at 56%. So you're talking big city areas here where you got a lot of listeners.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, these are coming from Nielsen ratings here. Once towering top 40 stations like WLS AM 890. I feel like I should be doing it in some
Hey, everybody.
my radio announcer voice.
WLS AM 890.
They switched to the talk format more than 3 decades ago and currently ranks 23rd in Chicago with a 1.7 share. No, I don't know what Nielsen ratings are. Does 1.7 mean anything to you?
I have no idea. Share of the market, probably, if I had to guess.
Okay. But, you know, a little bit closer to home, you have Philadelphia-based Odyssey, which owns 2 of the top-rated AM stations in Chicago. They talked to, the article I read talked to Craig Schwab, an Illinois native and veteran radio news executive who took the reins at WBBAM in January. He spent most of his career in AM radio, which, you know, near and dear to your heart, I suppose.
Yeah, it was probably a little bit more popular when he started, though.
He declined to break down the AM/FM audience that split up the station, but said the reach of AM signal is crucial for a news station, especially in emergencies. He goes on to say, I've covered a bunch of hurricanes in my time. I don't know how many hurricanes in Chicago you cover, but okay.
More than you think.
In different radio markets. Sorry, okay. He says in different radio markets.
It's the Windy City. So.
He says, I'll tell you that when electricity goes down and cell towers are out and all kinds of things aren't possible, television's not accessible, cell phone signals and batteries die, AM radio is there. And it is. It's like a safety blanket.
Mm-hmm. A really uncomfortable, scratchy safety blanket. Like the one you leave in your car if you get stuck on the side of the road.
Keeps you alive, though, right?
Yeah,
You're not gonna sleep with it normally, but you know it gets the job done. And I think that's really what it's like. Is that's kind of the gist of it. So, given your experience with being a AM producer, I want to throw a couple of questions at you in the last few minutes of the show here, and do a little question and answer session. So the first question I had for you is, should AM be kept alive? And if so, why?
You know, they taught me in journalism school not to ask yes or no questions. But yeah, I definitely think it should be, not just because I'd be out of a job, but because, when it comes down to it, like I said before, throwing out all the talk, all the entertainment stuff out the window when it comes to AM, I think it fundamentally is most important for its emergency broadcast capability. And if you were to get rid of that, I don't know how you would replace that. Like we talked about, internet is not reliable, television is not reliable, not as reliable as AM. And if it's not there, how are those messages going to get out at the end of the day? I think it would be a public security risk, honestly.
And I think that's a fair point. And it kind of leads me into the next question here is, should government intervene in keeping AM radio alive for that very reason? Now, I'm not an advocate on government intervention. I think every time the government gets involved in something, it's more likely to get screwed up and cost me more money than it is to fix anything. But because of that public safety aspect of it, is this a government problem? Should the government be doing something to make sure this doesn't go away?
I think that's a slippery slope, honestly. You know, when you've got government, if they're going to intervene with car manufacturers, I think that could go. I think it could send a bad message, and it could set a dangerous precedent for what government could do in the future. If they're going to intervene with something like this, where could they intervene in the future? However, I mean, something's got to be done, right? If Tesla doesn't even have AM now, so if you're in a Tesla, how are you going to get that transmission? They can't send every American a little tiny hand crank AM radio. You know, I think that.
I don't know. I think you can afford it.
I think in an instance like this, yeah, whether it's directly intervening with the auto manufacturers or whether it's finding some other way to get these transmissions out reliably, I think that, you know, they've got to do something.
Well, and that's really the kind of the ultimate follow-up question is, what can government do? Should government regulate what auto manufacturers can do? Should they subsidize? If it's a cost issue, should the government subsidize the cost of AM radios? Or should the government mandate we not buy these cars? Like what else can the government do other than either legislate the car industry or regulate the car industry or subsidize it?
Yeah, I really have no idea. I mean, it would have to be, again, there's always the thing of finding an alternative way to get these messages out. But I don't know what that would be. Large, like, speakers all around the country that would broadcast these signals if something happened. I have no idea. You know, it's a tough question to answer.
So you know, I think that is another alternative is the government can find another medium for it for emergency broadcasts. So the next question I have is kind of a personal question to you: is do you listen to AM radio in your car, and why or why not?
I do sometimes if I want to hear what's going on at my job just for fun, because we mess stuff up all the time. So it's nice to hear if I know who's working, if I know who's messing stuff up. But otherwise, no. The sound quality is it's too big of a hurdle for me to get over. I've been listening to FM radio my whole life, so it's really that it comes down to an issue of quality. I just can't get past it.
And I'll be honest with you, I used to listen to AM radio. I used to listen to sports talk radio all the time. There's a local station here, 610, that I used to listen to.
That closed down. I work for some of those people now.
But the majority of that type of discussion has moved into the FM frequencies now. So I don't listen to sports radio anymore, but if I did, I'd be listening to it on FM. And I think that's kind of a natural migration of the mediums themselves. There's no reason for them to be on FM other than quality, maybe more accessibility, maybe. I don't know. Did they move from AM to FM because they saw this happening and they realized that it was time to move?
Well, like most things in life, it's also a question of money, right? You have a way bigger advertising market when it comes to FM than you do AM. So these shows, when they move to FM, they can sell more ads, they can have more listeners, and that cycle can continue on a bigger scale than when they were on AM.
That's a very good point. So kind of back to the issue at hand here. Will not having AM radios in cars kill the medium of AM radio?
Well, it certainly wouldn't help. We had the stat a while ago in the show notes, and I can't find it, but it was like more than 50% of listening for AM is in the car. So if that's taken away, where else are people going to listen? I think just from those numbers alone, if you're losing more than half your listening audience, that's going to be tough to come back from. And, you know, asking people to either stream it online, which we do offer, which alleviates the quality problem, by the way. But then you run into the issue of having internet instead of just having a radio. I think it would. Yeah, I really do. I think losing that large of a chunk of your listener base would be tough to come back from.
Well, if we're talking about AM, keeping AM around just for the sake of it being an emergency service, do you need listenership when you don't have an emergency, though?
I mean, you got to keep the lights on, right? I mean, these things, unless you're being funded but directly by the government, you got to keep the
That's
lights on
that
somehow.
subsidy I was talking about,
Yeah.
where the government's going to basically pay for the service.
I think that'd be the only way around it.
Okay. And the last question that I had, and we can kind of wrap things up. What is the future of AM radio if it can be saved today? Is there a long-term future, short-term? Is it relegated to emergencies? Is there still a consumer-grade version of AM 20 years from now?
20 years from now, I don't know. I think by then it might move more to podcasting. I think if it's going to stick around, it's going to, in 20 years, it would probably be more for just emergency purposes. You know, I could, especially during COVID, a lot of stuff got cut around here. A lot of stations closed down because the small listener base they already had got even smaller because there was a lot more limiting of what we could do because everything was shut down. So yeah, I think in 20 years, it'd probably be more something akin to purely for emergency purposes.
Well, and I have to say, from a strictly podcasting standpoint, one of the biggest advantages of podcasting is literally, if you don't care too much about quality and production quality, literally anybody can podcast. And I know AM has a low barrier of cost of entry to get into, but it's not free. And podcasting's not free either. But you could generate a podcast on your phone if you wanted to.
Yeah.
So it's a lot easier for people to produce content from that and then publish it somewhere on free sites. Again, you're talking about a different audience and a different barrier to entry for your consumers for it. But as a podcaster, well, I can't say it's cheap to podcast because the level that we podcast on is very expensive. But for someone who just wants to create an audio podcast and doesn't want to go crazy with mixers and mics and all that stuff, you can do it for next to nothing.
Yep.
You know, you can produce content on the internet for next to nothing. Can AM radio claim the same thing? Like, what's your cost for someone if they want to produce this type of show, just audio on AM? What would something like this cost roughly?
Well, I mean, it would be dependent because, you know, how we do things is people pay us to be on the air. So we basically facilitate, we give them the studio and then they buy the time to talk. So, you know, I mean, it would be, what we've got is on the level of this, minus we don't have any video components, but in terms of the audio quality, we have the same, if not slightly better audio equipment there. And a lot of it is the built-in audience you're getting by being on the AM station. You've already got our built-in listener base. Now, is that it would depend on what your product is, what your podcast is about, if that listener base is going to listen to that. So I think that's, you know, you'd have to probably look at your market and your demographics from that. But that's really what it is getting that built-in audience, getting that guaranteed transmission from the same time every week or whenever you would want it. And I think that's the biggest selling point. And, you know, we go back to the reliability of AM and the accessibility of it. If you're broadcasting on AM, people might have an easier way of accessing your content that might not be familiar with how to access things on the internet or how to access things, you know, on YouTube or things like that.
Okay, I think that's a fair point. So there's certain trade-offs. There's not a one-to-one comparison between the two. Okay, I mean, I think we've kind of drawn this out to a kind of a conclusion of wait and see at this point. You know, it's not going anywhere anytime soon, but the future isn't bright for it.
No, I would not. No, I would say it's not bright. No.
So appreciate the AM radio that you have now, I guess.
Cherish it, yes, and you know, mail them money. I don't know, just envelopes full of cash,
buckets and buckets.
Yep.
All right, I think that's all we have for today. Before we did go, I want to take an opportunity once again to invite folks to subscribe to the audio and video versions of the podcast. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Tomorrow. Both audio and video can be found listed as Insights into Things. We are on anywhere you can get a podcast, Pandora, Amazon, TuneIn. One thing I would ask, though, that we haven't been pushing for is if you can, give us a rating, give us a thumbs up, you know, give us a review if you want. Let people know what kind of program we produce here, what kind of quality we have. I'd even take constructive feedback, constructive criticism if there's things that we can do better. We're always looking to improve things. You can write us that directly to us. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. You can hit us on Twitter at Twitter blah. Yeah, okay. Don't comment on that one, though. You can hit us on Twitter at insights_things. You can find us on Twitch, streaming 5 days a week at twitch.tv/insightsintothings. Just a side note, if you do have an Amazon Prime subscription, you do get a free monthly Twitch Prime subscription. You can throw that our way. That would help us out a lot. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/insightsintothingspodcast or on Instagram at insightsintothings. Or you can find all these links and more on our website at www.insightsintothings.com. And that's it. Another one in the books.
Stay safe out there, everybody.
Bye.
Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow, where we take a deeper look into how the issues of today will impact the world of tomorrow. From politics and world news to media and technology, we discuss how today's headlines are becoming tomorrow's reality.
Hello, everyone. Welcome into Insights into Tomorrow, episode 19, The State of Microsoft Games. My name is Sam Whalen. I'll be your host today, and alongside me is my co-host, Mr. Joseph Whalen. How you doing today, Joe?
I'm doing great, Sam. How are you doing?
Figured we keep it, not so formal for the show. I'm doing pretty good. Today's episode is going to be an update to episode 16. If you guys check that out, we talked about Microsoft in that episode, and it's been about a year since that big deal with Microsoft, Activision, Blizzard. That's all still been going on for a year. So we're going to give you a little bit of an update on that, as well as the state of Microsoft and where we think their games are going in the future. So just off the top, have you heard anything big about this acquisition or potential acquisition since that episode 16?
Well, I know they've ran into some issues with U.S. regulatory and UK, right? But I think they got green lights in Europe, which I think is kind of ironic that the UK is fighting it, but the EU actually kind of gave them the green light on it.
Yes, when our global nations have to interact with our gaming companies, things can get pretty complicated. But just a quick recap before we take a break. On January the 18th, 2022, Microsoft announced they were acquiring Activision Blizzard in an all-cash transaction. I forgot about that part. Valued at $68.7 billion or $95 a share at the time. Like we said, however, in the year since that, there have been lots of changes, lots of roadblocks, and things have definitely not gone as planned for Microsoft. So today we're going to look at some of those recent developments for the games and the state of the deal and the rough release of one game in particular and what the future looks like for Xbox and their games. So before we take our break, just want to remind you can subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, Amazon, Pandora. Anywhere you get your podcast, we will be there for you. Contact information, you can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. Twitter, we are insights_things. Facebook, you can search us there as well. Instagram, Insights Into Things. And all these links can be found on our websites, insightsintothings.com. Anything else to add?
I think that's it.
All right, let's get right into it. We'll be right back. And we're back. Welcome back, everybody. Insights into Tomorrow. number 19, talking Microsoft, talking Blizzard, talking Activision. So, as I gave the recap in the beginning, this deal happened about a year ago for around $69 billion. However, there was some recent news which caused us to want to record this episode. So after months of deliberating, the United Kingdom's Competition and Markets Authority, the CMA, which is like their version of the FTC, blocked Microsoft's pending acquisition of Activision Blizzard, primarily citing the potential monopolization of cloud gaming services if the deal went through. Now, we're deep in the Microsoft ecosystem, I'd say. I play Xbox all the time. You've been a Microsoft fan for a lot of your life, I think.
Sure.
Do you think cloud gaming when you think Microsoft?
Actually, no, I don't. As a matter of fact, recently I had canceled my Game Pass subscription.
Oh, really?
I hadn't been using it. There wasn't any games. All the games that were coming out on Game Pass were uninteresting. There wasn't anything that I liked, and I wasn't playing anything on there because I had moved over to predominantly play. When I did console, I moved over to the PlayStation. But most of my gaming's on the PC to begin with anyway, and I wasn't taking advantage of any of the Game Pass stuff on PC anymore. Like I played through Halo Infinite, and that was like the last big thing that I really did with Xbox, and I was playing Call of Duty and a couple of time killers is what I refer to as, but there wasn't anything that really kept my interest on it, so I couldn't justify the cost.
Yeah, I'm partially responsible for your shift to Sony and PlayStation. I've definitely recommended a lot of those games to you. But personally, I use Game Pass all the time. I think it's still the best value in gaming. If you're, for the kind of person that I am when I play games, I like to try all different kinds of things. And I think for the price you're paying, you're getting a great variety as well as all those things that are already included, and they're updating it regularly.
Well, and I don't doubt its value. I just doubt my use for it at the time.
Right.
And I've taken the same mentality with streaming video now. Like, if there's something that I want to watch, I'll subscribe to that service. I'll watch whatever it is, and then when it's between seasons, I'll get rid of it if there isn't anything else that really interests me. And there hasn't been any games that Microsoft has been coming out that has been interesting enough to me to keep it. Whereas, you have me on PlayStation doing Ragnarok, you have me doing Last
Spider-Man.
of Us, Spider-Man. So I've been kind of embroiled in all those games now. So I wasn't touching the Xbox for anything other than physical games that I own, like Rock Band and stuff like that.
Yeah, you mentioned the lack of games on Xbox, and that's something we're going to hit on a little bit later on the show. But going back to the citing of cloud gaming as part of the reason why this deal was blocked in the United Kingdom, this is a quote from Martin Coleman, who chaired the panel that investigated the deal. He said, "Cloud gaming needs a free, competitive market to drive innovation and choice that is best achieved by allowing the current competitive dynamics in cloud gaming to continue to do their job." Now, where this argument comes from is because part of your Games Pass subscription is something called xCloud, which is Microsoft's version of cloud gaming, where you can, boot up you can stream games to your phone or to your TV without having to download them. And it is very convenient. I don't really use it because I don't have a problem with storage too much. But that's kind of the main thrust of it. And we'll get into it a little bit later, but the numbers were slightly inflated because they're assuming that everyone that uses Games Pass is also using that xCloud service, and that's just not the case. This is from the Gamer article we have linked in the show notes here. The CMA claims that if the acquisition goes through, it would only reinforce the Xbox maker's strong position in cloud gaming, and it could potentially hold control of 60 to 70% of the cloud gaming market. And that's sort of where we get those inflated numbers, right? 60 to 70% of the market. Obviously, that would be a monopoly, and sort of a monopoly. I guess 100% would be a monopoly, but that's a scary number, having one company control 60 or 70% of that market, especially since gaming in general is sort of shifting toward that cloud method of service, where you don't necessarily have to download your games. You can just stream them. You have the Xbox that you have, the one without the disk drive, is primarily meant to have that service, so you don't have to download the games because it has a smaller storage capacity.
It's funny you mention that. I've never actually streamed a game to my console. All the games I've had, I've downloaded and played on the local machine itself. If they're talking streaming as their definition of cloud gaming, I don't know how popular that is, because there are technological limitations to that.
Yep.
There's only, yes, it's great that I can burn somebody else's computer resources and graphics to generate the stuff and stream it down to me. But when you're playing stuff that's competitive, online gaming, like first-person shooters, there's latency from the time that you push a button on your controller to the time it gets to the server and gets back to you. You can't overcome. I mean, that latency is a limitation of the speed of light. You can't overcome that. We have no way to overcome that right now. So unless they're putting data centers in right around the corner from my house that I'm streaming from, there's a technological problem from running it locally to running it over there. And if that's what they're calling cloud-based gaming, I think you're limited in what you can offer as far as that. You want to play Words with Friends or the puzzle games and stuff like that, I think you're okay. But when you want to get into, the die-hard competitive games where people are running cheats to take advantage of that lag time, I don't think that's the right recipe for it. And I think that's a lot of the reason why Google got out of the streaming gaming too.
Yeah, it's definitely the biggest barrier to entry, right? I mean, not everybody has top of the line internet all around the country, especially when you're getting into less populated areas. In some parts of in this country alone, it's just not going to work, right? Because you've got satellite-based internet or something like that.
Yeah.
So you're already limiting your market there. Now latency has always been a problem with multiplayer games, especially like in like fighting games, and they've kind of found workarounds with it with like rollback netcode, where the game is trying to anticipate and guess what you're going to do before you do it, and that can significantly help with that latency. But when you're looking at a company like Microsoft, whose predominant AAA games are all not first-person shooters, but they're all like competitive shooters, like Halo, Gears of War, even Sea of Thieves, which is definitely not competitive, but it is still a multiplayer online experience. Latency is going to be a problem in all those games. So is cloud gaming the direction you really want to push this in if you're relying on that multiplayer ecosystem pretty much at all times?
Well, and the other issue that you run into from a technological standpoint is when you're streaming games, you need a lot of bandwidth to stream the games. When you're playing on your local console to a server in the cloud, you're only sending telemetry at that point. So it's much less bandwidth requirements in order to handle that kind of data than if you're trying to stream the actual game back and forth. Yeah, you're upstreaming telemetry to it when you're streaming the game, but all that video is pre-processed, pre-rendered, and basically streamed down to you as if you're watching it at that point in time on a TV. So that takes a lot of bandwidth, and you've already got companies like Comcast and Verizon that are capping your bandwidth now because of the amount of usage you have. And as you move to a model where your model relies on enhancing the amount of bandwidth that you use, you're going to start getting pushback from your ISPs. You're going to start getting data caps. You've already got home internet from T-Mobile and Verizon and AT&T over their cellular networks where you only get that high-speed 5G for a certain amount of that month. And when you hit a certain cap, it drops it down to slower speeds, and that's going to have an impact on this type of gaming.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about, like, if this is the push we're gonna go for. It seems like Sony has its own version of Games Pass where they've got a ever-changing catalog of games coming in that you pay a flat fee per month, and then you can download these games and play them as they come to the service. It's just like what they have with Games Pass, and Ubisoft has one. A lot of these companies, they're doing that Netflix of gaming approach, combined with the cloud gaming aspect as well. So, if that's the way the industry is going, what is that going to look like with other companies, like you talk about the ISPs and things like that? Is everybody going to have to change if that's where gaming is going in the future? Because this is still, a multi-million-dollar, multi-billion-dollar industry that can throw its weight around if it needs to.
Well, and what's going to happen is the same thing that happened with streaming. You're going to have partnerships with the ISPs where the gaming companies are going to have to pay for premier access. Netflix, for instance. So Netflix actually has licensing arrangements with the various ISPs where Netflix puts essentially a caching proxy server inside their network. So when you request a movie for Netflix, you'll go up to Comcast. Comcast will hit the server that they're hosting, and if the movie's there, it'll stream from there. If it's not, it'll go out to Netflix then and get it, but then it caches it inside that network. So everyone else who requests that movie now gets it from the local. you're going to run into them doing the same type of thing where you're going to have exclusive partnerships with ISPs, which is going to cost the gaming companies money, and the gaming companies aren't going to absorb it. They're obviously going to pass it down to the customers. So you're going to see an increase in your monthly cost for that when the ISPs start getting fed up with it.
Yeah, I mean, we're already seeing increases in prices of Games Pass and things like that. I mean, Netflix too is notorious for raising their prices. All streaming services, it's just part of the, it's part of the, I guess, the business practice. It's how these things go. And especially, you talked about how you'll cancel your service if you're not using it. Most people don't do that. I'm one of them. The companies count on you not canceling and just letting it lapse every month so they can keep getting that money.
Well, and they deliberately make it difficult to cancel. You can't say, oh, if I don't renew this, I don't want it to auto renew. You can't stop auto renews on these. And when you go to cancel them, you got to jump through, 4 or 5 flaming hoops to go through to cancel these because they're counting on people not to go through that hassle.
Yeah, exactly. Getting back to the Microsoft Activision deal, though, this blockage in the UK is a huge blow for Microsoft, and the acquisition continues to face roadblocks from various international regulators. The FTC also is suing to block the deal in the US, citing concerns over Microsoft's habit of acquiring game studios as part of the Microsoft gaming brand. So that the FTC is not necessarily going with the cloud gaming angle. They're more worried about Microsoft buying up all these studios and sort of putting them under the Microsoft umbrella and having too much influence on them. But historically, Microsoft hasn't really done that. They will buy a studio and acquire it, but only so they can have their games on Games Pass. They don't necessarily have direct influence on the creative side of things, which you could see as better or worse, as we'll talk about in our second segment. But yeah, Microsoft has generally had a hands-off approach to a lot of these studios, aside from asking for that Games Pass Day 1 exclusive. So do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, and I think that's probably the most dangerous aspect of this entire thing for Microsoft, because it signals a level of scrutiny that they've not been under before. Because the acquisition of development studios for gaming isn't just restricted to gaming for Microsoft. They've done this across the board for all the properties they're offering. Their antivirus software was acquired. Their voice messaging service was acquired. Their team service was acquired, and it was all acquired and rebranded. So if they're going to get government regulation looking into their acquisition of various development companies for gaming, what would stop it at gaming? When they start acquiring things that become competitive in different aspects, because Lord knows Microsoft has already had issues with monopoly, complaints and stuff like that. But this is a practice they do across the board, not just gaming. So if they're getting scrutiny for gaming now, that's going to open up the board for everything against them moving forward.
Yeah, I think ultimately what a lot of this comes back to is it pro-consumer or anti-consumer? And I think when you even enter the monopoly word into the conversation, I think immediately it's going to turn a lot of people off. We don't want, myself included, we don't want one company owning everything, because then it stifles creativity, it stifles innovation, and especially when it comes to gaming, when one company is buying up all these studios, it can, and if those studios are poorly managed by the overhead company, it can negatively impact the kind of games we're getting, not to mention all the people that work for those studios. We haven't had a similar issue with Sony. Sony acquiring Insomniac, Guerrilla Games. They've been doing the same thing, but their games are very successful because Sony is much more hands-on with how they're running these studios. They have a very clear vision of what they want a Sony-branded game to be, and Microsoft hasn't really done that. And unfortunately, Sony is kind of winning this arms race of studio acquisitions because of their more hands-on approach.
Well, and Microsoft traditionally has had that issue across the board on all their properties, where the only property that they're really being successful at managing is their Azure system, their cloud server providers. Everything else, they don't seem to know what they want to do. Like, it still puzzles a lot of people that Microsoft is even involved in gaming. Microsoft dipped their toe in the hardware, the computer hardware business back with the Surface Pro series line launch. And all that did was really anger all their OEMs because it's cutting into their business. So Microsoft seems to have this, I want to do everything, but I don't necessarily want to do everything good. And the lack of quality seems to show quite frequently in some of their offerings.
Yeah. So despite the UK and US kind of combating the deal, the EU, European Union, has approved the deal despite those countries' hesitations. And again, like I mentioned before, EU officials claim that the estimation of Xbox cloud gaming dominance is being overstated, with all Xbox Games Pass users being counted as cloud gaming users, despite that not being the primary purpose of the service. So if the deal goes through, would Xbox truly hold a monopoly? You know, if they are able to acquire Activision, Blizzard, and King, I don't know. I'd have to rewatch episode 16. It was a long time ago. But King is the mobile brand and side of that thing. And mobile games make a ton of money. So if, King makes Candy Crush and all those kind of games, if Microsoft were to hold that, would they have a monopoly in the market? And what does this mean for other gaming companies like Sony and Nintendo?
Well, and that's the thing. I don't think it would be a monopoly from the get-go. And I think in a market as volatile as the gaming market is and as fickle as the gaming market is, the market will regulate itself for the most part. If it becomes monopolistic, then you can step in and regulate it and break it up. You're not going to stop consolidation in the gaming market. You're just not, because you've got 3 platforms, really, 2 platforms. I don't really count Nintendo as a competitive platform at this point.
I don't know. They got that new Zelda game making a lot of money.
And that's probably the last good game they're going to come out with on the Switch.
With the Switch, yeah. 7-year-old outdated hardware.
Yeah. But that's their shtick, really. But you don't have platforms out there that you can release this stuff on. So as a result, you're going to have consolidation. Remember way back when Sega decided that they were getting out of the console business and they had all their exclusives, and they basically, all the sharks that were circling around, Microsoft and Sony and everyone, swooped in to get these exclusives. Well, how many of those exclusives are exclusives that are exclusive moneymakers now? Sonic the Hedgehog. When was, aside from a really, I don't know, questionable choice on movies, since when has Sonic the Hedgehog been something that's been significant?
Sonic Frontiers. That was like last year.
Yeah.
I don't think it's exclusive though. Is it? I don't know. I have to look.
I don't think it is. But when that happened, everyone thought that you were going to have monopolies come out of that. And you're not. People are going to buy the game that's quality. And if you don't put out a quality game, it doesn't matter how many game studios you own. If it's not quality, they're not going to use it. And Microsoft has run into this numerous times. You know how many people have moved off of Microsoft Office because of how terrible it's become?
Yeah.
And they don't want to pay for the subscription for a service that they've never paid. Just questionable business practices is what turns people off. And Microsoft has kind of demonstrated, they've been the poster boy of how not to be monopolistic at this point in time based on quality.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to that issue of quality, which is exactly what we're going to cover in our next segment. After the break, we'll take a look at the launch of Redfall and other Xbox games exclusives and how they impact Xbox's place in the gaming landscape, and of course, that ever-important question of quality. Right after the break, we'll be right back.
For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to episode 19 of Insights into Tomorrow, where we are talking the Microsoft acquisition of Blizzard and Activision and King. Acquisition and Activision are really hard to say in the same sentence.
That is a tongue twister.
My name is Sam Whalen, and of course we've got Joseph Whalen on the other side, on the ones and twos. But we just talked about the deal itself. Now we're going to get more into the issue of quality and what that means for Xbox going forward. So the big news story in the past couple weeks, if you follow any kind of gaming news, is the release of Redfall. This comes from publisher Bethesda and developer Arcane Studios. You might know Arcane from games like Prey and Dishonored. All great games. Redfall was released on May the 2nd to disastrous critical and audience reviews. This was kind of a big shock. Well, for a while it was a big shock. There was some IGN footage that had come out before the game came out that people ragged on the reviewer that was playing it because they were doing. They weren't. It looked like they were bad at games. Kind of boil it down. But when the game came out, people realized that that's just the game. The game is not easy to play, and it's really poorly optimized, and it's a big letdown from a studio like Arcane that is known for their immersive sims like Prey and Dishonored. I've played the game myself. I've played Redfall. It's real bad. But it did come out to Games Pass, so I had the opportunity to play it as part of that subscription. Have you seen any footage or reviews or articles about Redfall?
I've seen some gameplay footage of it. I haven't played it myself, obviously, because I don't have my Game Pass subscription. And I've read a couple of reviews. In fact, in preparation for the show today, I was doing some research on it. And you're right, the reviews pretty much across the board are pretty consistent. And when you start getting 4 or 5 people that are saying the same exact thing that's wrong with the game, chances are that's probably what's wrong with the game.
Yeah.
But I'll be honest with you, I'm not shocked given the hype around this and what the great hope for this was supposed to be. The last 4 or 5 years of games like that have kind of fallen flat. You had Halo Infinite had the same problems. You had Cyberpunk had the same type of problem. Like, you have games that the market is demanding that they come out. You have pressures on development houses that are forcing you to release games before they're ready. And I honestly think that part of the problem with this is largely to do with the cloud infrastructure, because the idea, the philosophy right now is, oh, well, we can kick that out and patch it next week.
Yeah.
We're fine. We're good. Where before, when you put it out on a disk and you didn't have all the cloud infrastructure in place, it had to work. You didn't have the opportunity to put 5 patches out. We just saw it happen with the new Star Wars game that
Jedi
came
Survivor.
out. The first patch that came out was literally 3 times the size of the original game. So it doesn't shock me. I think the problem we have is the market drivers that are forcing these out rely too heavily on the fact that they can be patched, but they neglect to take into effect the negative press that your property is going to get in the process.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Phil Spencer, who's sort of the public face of Xbox, he's not. I don't think he's a CEO, but he's like the guy when you think Xbox. He's been doing the rounds. He's been taking the hits for Redfall. But one of the things he talked about was this concept of when to delay a game, and he says it's not always purely based on hitting that economic goal. Sometimes it is for creative reasons, and a lot of what he talked about was. Ultimately, what they say is what it comes down to is if the studio is not meeting their creative goals, then that's when there's a serious issue. And he not so subtly suggested that might have been part of the problem with Redfall, is that the folks at Arcane were not necessarily making the game they wanted to make, but this game was hyped up a lot, and it had to come out, and they already delayed it, and it didn't really seem to make that much of a difference. You talk about Jedi Survivor had the same thing. That game got delayed. But still came out with a litany of technical issues, a litany of problems, and a day 1 patch that was like 100 gigs. So, it's the past 3 months have seen multiple releases that are almost fully broken at launch, especially on PC. I mean, you play a lot on PC.
Yeah.
PC ports are notoriously not as well optimized as a console. But it really starts to raise the question of, exactly what you said, this tarnishing of the brand of, it's almost become standard when a AAA game releases to give it 3 to 4 months to have it actually be functional, especially if it's like a multiplayer game. And it's like, at what point did this just become okay? I'm still the guy, I'm definitely part of the problem. I will buy a game day 1 if I want it. But yeah, a lot of these games are coming out and they're just not finished. And when a game will take 4 to 5 years to make, do we give it 6 to 7 years at that point? Is that too long? Is it an issue of crunch in development where developers are getting high pressure to put these games out, so they're slipping up and there's issues there. Is it a marketing problem? Are we showing these games too early? We put out a CGI trailer 3 years before the game comes out, and people every year are asking at Summer Games Fest and things like that, where's Redfall? Where's whatever? That by the time the game comes out, it's not at all what people thought it was going to be, which is kind of what happened with Redfall. Nobody really knew what it was because it was a lot of cool CGI trailers. You knew it was a shooter. You knew it was Arcane, so you can imagine you're going to have some immersive sim elements, probably some supernatural or magic elements. But then the game gets closer to release, and you have these people doing previews, and they describe it as like Far Cry or like Destiny, and everybody's scratching their heads of like, what? That's not what Arcane has ever been known for. They're known for single player immersive experiences. And Redfall comes out and it's like a Far Cry Borderlands type game. And it doesn't even really nail that because, those kind of games don't really perform as well as they used to. And like in the 2010s, that was sort of the formula, massive open world, play how you want. But Redfall doesn't really do that well either, unfortunately. And, I don't want to sit here and just bash the game because I do like Arcane. I'm a big Prey fan. I love Dishonored. Redfall just wasn't hitting the mark. It's got a current score on Metacritic, the Xbox version, a 56 on Metacritic, 3.5 user score, with critics citing extremely poor performance, uninteresting mechanics, and it overall just felt rushed. And like I said, I played the game myself. That is very true. From the moment you boot it up, like there aren't cutscenes. It's just still images with audio over it. And I'm like, what are we? I don't know. It blows my mind. There's a lot of little issues. There's a lot of texture pop in. You can go watch the Digital Foundry video on YouTube. They did a great breakdown of it, of like the nitty gritty technical issues. And it's like, how does a game like this come out in 2023? It blows my mind.
Well, and a lot of people want to rush to judge Microsoft on this for having a game come out that doesn't meet their standards. And like you had said in the previous segment, Microsoft has been largely hands-off on this project and most of their development studios. So I think the problem that you run into is Microsoft is involved from a finance standpoint and from a make sure it gets out the door on time standpoint. But from the creative side of things, I think Microsoft is largely hands-off on a lot of this stuff. And I think that's probably the problem, is that if you're coming out with an exclusive on Microsoft's platform, Microsoft needs to be there. It needs to be part of that process to make sure that it meets their standards. And it makes me wonder, maybe it does meet their standards. Maybe Microsoft's standards are just that low.
Yeah.
Because what this is a reflection of so many other things that Microsoft has released that is subpar and is one of those kick it out the door, we'll patch it later type things.
Wow.
So it very well might meet their standards is the problem.
Yeah, and it's tough because when you own a studio and you have the ability to make sure that all the problems that modern day releases have don't happen, but you still do, right? Like we talk about Cyberpunk and how disastrous that was. That wasn't owned by anybody. That was CD Projekt Red. That was their game, published on all platforms or released on all platforms, and it had all those issues. You look at a Sony game, you look at Ragnarok, you look at Horizon Forbidden West, you look at Spider-Man 2 whenever that comes out, or Spider-Man 1 even. There is a pedigree to a Sony game. When you boot it up, you know that it's probably going to be awesome, at the very least, or not have a lot of these problems that a lot of modern day games are facing. There aren't that many technical glitches. It runs well. It tells a good story. And, Sony's focusing on single player games while Microsoft is more on the multiplayer side of things. But there still has to be that pedigree when you are a big studio a big publisher like Microsoft or a big company like Sony. You've got to have a quality control level that sets the standard for your brand. I mean, it's just, I don't know how else to describe it.
Well, and I'll be honest with you, I have been out of the Sony ecosystem for quite some time until you kind of dragged me back into it kicking and screaming when I was finally able to get hands on a PS5. And the gaming experience, first of all, the user interface on the PS5s is completely different than the Xbox. I found the PS5 to be much more refined, much more, well, it was difficult. There was a learning curve for me. Whereas the interface on the Xbox is juvenile almost. It's cluttered.
It's awful.
It is. It's hard to navigate. But the gaming experience itself, when I fired up the last two games that you had me play, the
Last of Us,
Last of Us and
Ragnarok.
God of War.
Yeah.
When I fired those up, it wasn't a gaming experience. It was a movie experience from day one. From the time you turned it on, the menus, everything. It was an interactive movie. You felt like you were part of it. The cutscenes, the dialogue, everything, the acting, the story. It was an interactive movie that you were part of. Maybe that's because it was focused for single player.
Right.
I don't get that. Like, I didn't get that when I played, the sequel to Red Dead. I didn't get that from Red Dead either. But the Sony experience itself, the attention to detail, and the level of quality. Now, granted, Spider-Man had some quality issues in it.
No, you think so?
Yeah, there's a few things in there that were an issue. But for the most part, everything was cinematic in the experience that I got to play. And it made me really enjoy the experience. And when I play stuff on Xbox, it's literally just to kill time. It's not to enjoy myself, to immerse myself, or anything. So they're two very different types of gaming styles and platforms. And they're managed very differently. That quality comes across, and it's just blatantly obvious in just starting the game up.
Yep.
And that's where the biggest contrast, I think, is to me.
Yeah, and Redfall comes out at the time when Microsoft has been sorely lacking in those first-party AAA titles, which is exactly what you talk about. Off the top of your head, you can name 3 or 4 Sony games that you've played that hit a chord with you.
Yeah.
And Microsoft just doesn't have that, and they haven't for a very long time.
Well, and I'll tell you, I'm a huge, huge Halo fan.
Yep.
Okay. Not only have I loved every one of the games that came out, well, I've played every one of the games that came out.
Halo Wars 2?
I've read all the novels. I'm up to date.
Yeah.
I'm in the middle of reading the latest novel.
We're
now.
both huge Halo fans.
Love it, love it, love it. Halo Infinite just did not resonate with me. Did not hit with me. It's ironic that the environment that you're in was so broken, because it felt like the storyline and the character development and everything else was equally broken.
Yep.
Like, you jump into this and you're completely disjointed. You have no idea what's going on. It was buggy. There was a number of glitches that crept up through the thing that prevented me from progressing until a patch came out. But it just didn't have that refined feel. And the fact that the terrain that you're on is literally a shattered world only reinforced. And to me, it was almost like, oh, well, they just didn't finish it. Then they decided to make it part of the storyline.
Yeah, the ring is unfinished that you're on.
Right.
Yeah.
And, like, it literally felt like they just didn't feel like finishing the game. And so much the game was missing when it came out. I played through it. I did all the side missions, and I haven't gone back to it in months, probably a year at this point. And there's no reason for me to.
Right. Yeah. So Halo Infinite came out in 2021. Personally, I really enjoyed the campaign at launch. But, Halo is always kind of a weird story to follow. If you go play all the games, like, the story is not always the forefront. It's always the gameplay. And the gameplay in Infinite was good, but a lot of where the issues come in is with the multiplayer of Infinite. It had little to no multiplayer support post-launch, and it took forever to get the content updates going for that service. It took forever for that to start rolling out, and it ended up leading to Microsoft cleaning house at 343 months after the release, just because of how big of a failure it was. I still play Halo multiplayer every once in a while. I don't know why. I just really, it's still Halo at the end of the day, and I still enjoy that. But it had so much potential, and everybody at the time was saying, Microsoft can't mess this up. And they kind of did. Like, the multiplayer at launch, everybody was on board. It's such an exciting announcement when they announced that the multiplayer was going to be free. They announced it day and date at, I forget where. Very exciting, very hype around that. But as time goes on, the campaign comes out, and it's the semi-open world. It still feels good. It still feels like Halo, but then there's just nothing. There's just nothing after it, and it's almost like they just like, this is Halo. This is when you buy an Xbox, Master Chief is on the box, and it's like, how are we not dumping all of our resources into this? It blows my mind. You know, you had the thing with co-op. Co-op didn't come out at launch. Forge was delayed. All these pieces, and I think Infinite was delayed like a year, like a long time. And again, it still comes out at launch, and it's missing all these pieces. And it's like, guys, how did you not nail this? Like, it's Halo. Like, this is your one thing.
Well, and the other problem that I had with this whole thing, one, you had 2 downloads basically, two applications that you ran, 2 games you ran. You could either run the multiplayer or you could run the campaign. It wasn't until months later that they were even integrated into each other. So it was a completely disjointed experience. But the other problem they had here, which I think really highlights the Game Pass problem that they're running into, is it was released on Game Pass.
Yep, I was just going to mention that. Yep.
How do you expect to make money on a premier game if you're going to give it away for free on your subscription service?
Yep.
Like, even Disney Plus is smart enough not to put their movies on Disney Plus the day they come out in theaters. Now, granted, there's legal reasons for that, too. But, like, make them wait a month, 2 months, 3 months. Like, there was a point in time when you would get pre-orders so that you could get exclusive content. You would get pre-orders so you could get the higher end versions of the games. You get a full on all that stuff. Nowadays, what's the point of a pre-order if you're going to release it at the same time on your subscription service?
Pre-orders are also a way to project sales numbers too.
They are, but right now, I think the thing with pre-orders is I'm willing to pre-order a game if I'm guaranteed that it's going to work on day one. That's really what I'm shooting for. If I pre-order for you, maybe you can pay the developers more to finish the game.
Which it probably isn't going to work on day one. But yeah, you bring up the issue of Games Pass, and this ties back into Redfall as well. Games Pass is still a good value, but it's worth noting that any game that comes out day one on Games Pass is already going to face tough sales numbers. Games Pass tends to cannibalize sales numbers in exchange for that wider access. And I think that's what Microsoft was banking on with Halo, is that, hey, it's on Games Pass. If you guys get Games Pass, you'll have Halo, our flagship title. You'll have it day one on your new console. And yeah, that might have worked in the short term, but in the long term, where's the money coming from, really?
Yeah.
So going back to Redfall, in just 2 weeks since its launch, Redfall has had a drastic reduction in players. And this is coming from Steam, so take it with a grain of salt. I know it's tough to compare, but Steam numbers are probably pretty accurate still. At its debut, Redfall was averaging around 6,000 players, and that figure has plummeted to around 200 players since May 16th. So that's like 2 to 3 weeks. You're losing, I don't know math, a lot of players. And it's overall, this has been a bad look for Microsoft. You know, we talked a lot about Halo, and that was another big one where it's just like, you know, Microsoft hypes up these first-party releases, and they're almost always disappointments. Especially in a time when games like Ragnarok, like we talked about, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom are dominating critically and financially for Sony and Nintendo. You know, what is Microsoft doing to make themselves stand out in, you know, I don't like console wars. I think that's stupid, but it is competitive business still. It's not, you know, we're not going to say Xbox is better than a PlayStation, but like, these are businesses that are selling products, and some businesses are selling their products, better products, and they're selling them better.
Well, and I think the real funny thing here is in doing my research ahead of time, I read one article and they talked about, from a hardware perspective, the Xbox is better hardware.
Yep.
It's more powerful hardware. But they can't get the software right. So it doesn't matter how much horsepower you throw at the problem. If the game doesn't run, it doesn't run really fast on a good
Right.
system, right? So why they need to focus less on the hardware, right? Because you have a console there that's overly powerful for the type of gaming that you need right now, which is great for future-proofing it. If you've got a future, if you can't keep your premier product, I mean, Halo is the Xbox franchise.
Yep.
If you can't do that right, what are you going to do right? You own it.
Yeah.
You made it, you know? And like people are longing for the Bungie days now. Like 343 Studios was clever and it was neat and it had promise, and it hasn't delivered on that promise.
And there, I mentioned that story about Microsoft laying off a bunch of people at 343. We don't like to see people get laid off. Obviously, that's bad. But also, it blew my mind that 343 kept Halo. They didn't give it to another publisher or developer. Like, after all this, we're still going with 343. Nobody liked Halo 4 or 5.
Right.
And it's like, we're still staying with 343. Like, okay. I mean, I guess if they fired a lot of the people, maybe they'll bring new people in to give it a new voice or to make it better. I don't even know what's next for Halo. I have no idea what they're going to do. Do you think they do another mainline entry? Do you think we get I don't know. Do you have any ideas?
From a storyline standpoint, I don't think you can go much further down. I mean, granted, you've got the whole TV show now with Master Chief. That's a completely different animal.
Yeah.
But I think from a storyline standpoint in Halo, you either have to reinvent the brand itself, or you have to move on to some other storyline.
And that's what everybody thought Infinite was going to be.
Yeah.
It looked like it was going to be, we're in the age of the soft reboot sequel. That's what everybody thought Infinite was going to be. And in some ways it was, but we still kept the convoluted plot that everybody didn't like about Halo.
Right.
They should have just stripped it down to Halo 1, where it's very simple objectives, and they just didn't do that. And, they had this, it was like they had the setting of Halo 1, a very basic ring, but with with the still overly complicated space epic that nobody knows unless you read 10 novels.
Well, and that's the problem even with the novels right now, not to get off topic too much, but even the novels now are still sticking to this whole, we're going to fire the rings. Get over it, guys.
Yeah.
That ship has sailed already, pun intended. You need to come up with another galactic, and don't do the whole Cortana thing, because that didn't work either.
They're still doing that, I think.
They are. It's still referenced in all the novels and everything. It's like the story. That's why I say the story itself. They don't even have anything in the wings waiting that they can pull from the novels that's really viable, because even the novels are getting kind of long in the tooth.
I think you got to blow the whole thing up.
I agree. I think if you're going to do it, don't just come out with a remastered edition of it.
Reboot it.
Reboot the whole thing. I'm with you there.
Yeah. So as we wrap up this second segment, how can Microsoft reclaim the glory days of Halo? I put Gears of War in here, but I like Gears of War. I don't think Gears of War is anywhere near Halo in terms of mass market appeal. What is next for Microsoft? How are they going to reclaim, the days of they're dominating the multiplayer shooter market? Do you have any ideas?
We'll talk about it when we come back.
All right, we'll be right back after this quick break.
Insights into Entertainment, a podcast series taking a deeper look into entertainment and media. Our husband and wife team of pop culture fanatics are exploring all things from music and movies to television and fandom. We'll look at the interesting and obscure entertainment news of the week. We'll talk about theme park and pop culture news.
And the multiplayer is still
We'll give you the latest and greatest on pop culture conventions.
It's like after the... Can you dump out of this? Welcome back, everyone. We had to dump out of the commercial. I'm sure you were wondering what the next topic they cover on Insights into Entertainment is. You'll just have to go watch the show yourself. Welcome back in Insights into Tomorrow. This program, episode 19, we're talking Microsoft and the state of Microsoft. As we teased in the end of the last segment, what is next for Microsoft? What are they going to do? We had the disastrous release of Redfall. Microsoft has one more trick up its sleeve. Xbox and Bethesda's Starfield, set to release on September 6th of this year, allegedly. Expectations are sky high for this title. From the same studio that made Fallout and Elder Scrolls, Starfield is set to be Bethesda's deep dive into the sci-fi genre. So I'll ask you the same thing I asked you about Redfall. Did you see anything about Starfield? Do you know anything about it?
I have. Actually, a lot of folks, because I still play Star Wars The Old Republic, a lot of folks in there are really looking forward to this. This is supposed to be like the second coming of
I know.
Christ here, where it's going to be the savior to the entire game industry, and I'm like,
Have we ever heard this narrative before with another sci-fi game?
yeah, and it's like, okay, guys, let's wait and see. Give it 3 months once it's released, and we'll see where we wind up.
Yeah, I pretty much feel the same way. I've kind of fallen off the Bethesda hype train ever since Fallout 4. I was a big Elder Scrolls. I mean, who didn't love Skyrim? Skyrim's like one of the best games ever
I still
made.
play it.
Yeah, me too. Fallout 4 comes out and it's not great. Fallout 76 comes out and is even worse. It's like, okay. Now, the one thing I don't know, a lot of the reason those games feel old is because of the engine they're running on. Starfield might be on a new engine. I neglected to do the research on that. If it is, that's great, unless it's buggy and bad. But the game was recently rated 17 plus by the ESRB, with a potential ban coming in Australia for explicit drug use. But Australia bans, if there's like cigarettes in your game, they'll get it banned in Australia. But yeah, this is the big thing for Microsoft. When this was announced as an exclusive acquisition, you had Todd Howard come out. It was a big deal, and this game's been hyped for years. Do we have breaking news?
So I just looked it up real quick. Starfield is using Creative Engine 2, which was a modified version of Creative Engine, which is what Skyrim, Fallout 4,
Yeah.
and Fallout 76 is on.
So modified is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. Hopefully, it's heavily modified. They've released gameplay footage of it, and it looks, I don't get it. I don't understand the hype behind this game at all. I really don't even have any interest in it. I mean,
Honestly, I think everyone that I've talked to about it is looking forward to the immersion of it. It's the story. It's the size of the world that you're going to be in. I don't think anyone is looking at it for any kind of breakthrough technologically.
Oh, no.
It's just, hey, this is an escape for me, and it's going to be a big escape.
everybody wants the Fallout 3 or Fallout New Vegas. That's my favorite. The Skyrim, where you can just walk and just get lost in this world. And hey, I hope they can do that. But personally, I have pretty much no faith in Bethesda to pull that off. And it's like, does Microsoft? Because clearly they do, right? If they decided to acquire when they acquired the studio, they make Starfield their one of their tentpole games coming out, and their only tentpole game coming out in like the next year. Do you think that this is where Microsoft should be putting their eggs in the basket?
I think this is another example of Microsoft not really doing the due diligence on acquisitions and projects. I think they were sold a good bill of things here that they could use, but I don't think they ever dug deep enough. And again, it's one of those things like 3 years ago we saw a trailer for this and it looked really good. Okay, well that trailer was basically just a movie someone put together. There was no gameplay in it whatsoever. There was no technology demonstration in it whatsoever. I almost think that's what Microsoft saw and decided that that's the direction they want to go.
They got tricked too.
And they got tricked too. And I'm sure this wouldn't be the first time it happened to them.
Yeah. The gameplay that was released, it doesn't look that special to me personally. It looks a lot like No Man's Sky, if you ever played that game. Another notoriously poorly received game on launch. However, credit to, I forget the name of the studio, but they fixed that game. That game is playable. Tons of new free content. They're updating it every couple months. No Man's Sky, check it out if you like, space adventuring. However, I don't think that's what people want from a Bethesda game. I think they want that element of action and immersion, like you talked about. And I don't know if Starfield's going to have that. I hope it does. I hope it does well. But I think it is a really, really big gamble for Microsoft. And I just don't know if it's going to pay off, even if it is successful. I don't know if it's going to repair all the ill will that's been done so far.
Well, and that's a very good point. I don't know if Microsoft has a choice. Microsoft has dug a hole so deep for themselves that they can't get out themselves. So they're hoping for something like this to kind of propel them out of that hole and put them back into the mainstream to get them to the point of some level of respectability with gamers. I think a lot of people have just lost respect. Microsoft has lost that luster. And you're right, if this doesn't work, I don't know where they're going from there.
Yeah. I mean, they've got Elder Scrolls 6, but God knows when that's coming out. 2025, maybe 2024. But like, I think it goes back to this issue of accessibility too, not in terms of if you have a handicap or something like that, but I mean, like if you're trying to get somebody into gaming, like you as an example, I was able to sell you on Ragnarok and Last of Us because they are relatively easy to pick up and play if you've played other games. Starfield as like an immersive first-person space thing, I don't know if that is as easy to sell to people as a emotional story between a father and a daughter or a father and a son that Sony can offer. I mean, I know sci-fi has a pretty general broad appeal, and I don't know. I hope it does well. But there have been some technical issues with it. We just talked about the Creative Engine 2 that it's going to be running on. Not great. If you go play Fallout 4 or 76, you can see where they're really stretching. Like you could tell it's old. But this is the sticking point for me. Just Starfield has been reported to be launching at 30 FPS, with performance mode rumored to be coming later. Very strong rumors that like it might not happen. They might not get that 60 FPS mode. Is this unacceptable in 2023? A AAA game releasing capped at 30 FPS? Some would say yes. I'm one of those people. I can't stand it. I can't stand 30 FPS. I think if you put out your game and it's not 60 FPS, I think that's unacceptable.
Well, and I think it also has a lot to do with the resolution that you're putting it out at. You know, if you're talking 30 frames per second on a 4K TV, yeah, you probably should be at 60. There's no reason the technology can't handle 60, that's for sure.
Right.
If you're talking standard HD and you're doing 30 frames, you're about 10 years behind where you need to be at that point.
It goes back to that hardware versus software issue. It's like you have the technology.
Yeah.
The Xbox Series X is like the equivalent of like a gaming PC, right? Like,
yeah.
How are we not? And I think Bethesda might have commented on this of saying that like it's an engine thing and also the amount of things happening in the game at once. That's why they got to cap it at 30 FPS.
Well, and I'll tell you, from a technological standpoint, it probably is the engine, because the options that are available to you on Xbox Series X, even S now, like the DirectX 12, okay? So you have direct memory access available in DirectX 12. So you don't have, so traditionally what happens is when you send video that has to be encoded and decoded by the video processor, that's sent compressed, and then has to be uncompressed in video memory, read in, processed, rendered, and then written back out. DirectX 12 gives the video memory of the video processor direct access to system memory. So it bypasses all that, infinitely more efficient and faster than you can do it. But your engine has to be able to take advantage of DirectX 12. And if it can't, which a lot of them don't at this point in time, then you got a problem.
Yeah, it's like you future-proofed everything, but, you know, at what cost? You know, what are you going to do? I don't know. Bethesda games in general are known for being buggy and running poorly at release. It would be amazing if Starfield came out day one, runs great, you know, smooth, as smooth as 30 frames can be. No buggy thing, because that was what sunk Fallout 4 and 76, was just the litany of internet videos of all the things wrong with it, and immediately you're dead in the water. It's just, I don't know, and it goes back to what is next for Microsoft if this doesn't work out. It's like, what do they have lined up? They've had some good AA games come out. Hi-Fi Rush, great game, highly recommend it. But it's these big tentpole games that Microsoft is just lacking, that I think overall is why they are, to the traditional gamer, why they are losing to Sony in these, you know, in game to game, if we're going to compare it.
Yeah, well, and I'll tell you, if 30 frames per second is considered acceptable in this case, don't expect a lot of action.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to see anything that requires high frame rate in there. If
it's a first-person shooter.
Good luck with that.
I know, that's I don't get that. Like, that's why in Fallout you had the Vault, or what was it, the VAC system, whatever the thing where you could like stop time and like target different areas. It's because Fallout is not a good shooter.
Right.
That's why you had to have like auto aim essentially. Fallout is all about the characters and you know the characters you meet and the world itself. It's not really supposed to be a shooter. It just happens to have guns in it. They kind of did that a little better in Fallout 4 by making it more actiony because it was more updated. But Starfield, it looks like they're really trying to do that more of a shooter and make it a space epic where you can explore. I forget, there was a line they had said a couple months ago where there's like 1 billion planets or something like that.
Right.
It's like, no, there's not. First off, that's not true. There's no way that's true. And it's like, I don't know. This feels very cyberpunk to me, of a game that's been hyped up for years that is going to, like, people are going to go into it and never want to come out. They're going to have to be, like, drip fed, like, like the feeding tube so they don't have to come out of the game. And it's like, how are we still in 2023 making these grand assumptions about games when the only people that can pull that off is Sony?
That's true. And unfortunately, what you're going to find is this is going to be a judgment time for Microsoft. If they can't meet expectations and they don't have anything else in the pipeline, you might start seeing those Game Pass subscriptions drop off.
Yeah, especially if the price continues to raise.
Or there's retro gaming. Everyone loves retro gaming, and that's, I think, the direction that Game Pass is going to go.
Well, they just announced the last of the backwards compatible stuff they're putting up. So I've bought so many 360 games again on Xbox. I'm not proud of it, but I did because they're all right there and they're easy to play. And you can get an FPS boost sometimes too, which is pretty nice.
Right.
But anyway, so that we're gonna get a Starfield Direct, I think in June or maybe sooner, giving us more information on the game. So maybe we'll get something in that is a little bit more concrete, that gets my hopes back up. Or maybe we'll get a delay. Who knows?
Well, if I had to put money on it, I'd say you're looking at 3 to 6 month delay till the next delay.
Yeah. I don't. Who knows? That'd be bad because then they wouldn't only have Redfall this year, and that would be a real bad look. But anyway, we're gonna take our last break, and when we come back, our final thoughts and a couple more words about Microsoft when we return. Or we'll be back immediately. Who's to say?
And we're back.
Welcome back, everybody.
Yeah, we had to dump that last commercial. We're having some technical difficulties here today. So what are we talking about in our last segment?
Well, I had something positive down, but you had another angle you might want to go in.
Nothing overly negative, I don't think. I kind of wanted to talk about what the future of cloud gaming looks like. I mean, we talked about kind of we played around what the definition of it is. But what are your thoughts on things like Google getting out of the market? Is that a sign that, Google has a reputation for testing the waters with things and kind of hooking people in and then backing out? Do you think that's a sign of where cloud gaming is going to go?
I don't know. I think cloud gaming is a hard sell because when it comes to gaming, you got to have a box, right? You got to have a box to plug in your TV. It's been that way since gaming was like a thing with like the Nintendo Entertainment System and stuff like that. So I think the biggest barrier for this, well, the second biggest barrier, I'll get to the first in a second, is that how does this work? You're telling me it's just a USB stick I put into my TV, which Microsoft is testing that, by the way. They're working on that, or like an app on your TV.
Right.
I think in practice it's very cool. But the biggest issue is the internet, is the infrastructure for it to be able to roll it out. I just don't think we're there yet. And, we're getting there. And I think in small scale it can work. Like the fact that I can boot up an Xbox game, an indie game that's on Games Pass on my phone. I think that's great. But I think for it to become the norm, I think we're probably 5 to, if not more, years away from that.
Well, and I agree. I think the technological limitation is sort of what we talked about earlier. Because of the type of games that they're talking about here, latency is an issue. And like when you transmit something over fiber optic, you get pretty much, with the exception of conversions on one end or the other, you get the speed of light. But we can transmit across copper, which most people tend to wind up doing. All your big networks that you're connecting to are copper networks. You're limited to about 1/3 the speed of light with the resistance of the wire. You can't get over that. You can't overcome this. If you're bouncing it off a satellite, you're limited by the physical distance that you have between you and that satellite and back to Earth. There's no way to overcome that unless you start doing quantum entanglement at some level.
Microsoft can do it.
So I think the cloud gaming aspect is dangerous to try to go in that direction. But I'm curious how mobile gaming will go, because now we've got your Stream Deck out. Asus is now releasing
a stronger version,
PC-based version of a gaming system. You have the Nintendo Switch that's a self-contained gaming system. All these things can hook up to a TV system. Yeah. Is that the interim until we can correct the shortcomings of the networking or for cloud gaming?
Yeah, maybe. We're getting the Switch 2. People are thinking maybe 2024, 2025. The Steam Deck and the what was the other one? Asus.
Asus Ally.
Yeah,
something
it's like the
that.
stronger version of a Steam Deck, basically. Those things are cool. I had a Steam Deck for about a week before I returned it. It's just not for me. I think it depends on the kind of gamer that you are. If you're somebody that wants to boot up and play a couple matches of Call of Duty and then you call it a night, I think cloud gaming might be able to work if they can figure out the latency. Otherwise, you're gonna have to have the 165 gigs that Warzone takes up in your console. If you want to get that intense single player experience, cloud gaming could work for that because it's you don't have to worry about it as much.
Sure, yeah.
And handheld, I think, is good to if you travel a lot. I think it depends on the consumer on base to base, but I just think overall, the box plug it into your TV. I think that's going to have the most mass market appeal and accessibility based off internet. I just think cloud gaming is going to be a hard sell everywhere around the country and the world until we can figure out a better infrastructure for the internet.
See, and I long for the days of the LAN party when I used to
Oh,
pack
yeah.
up my gaming system and take it to a friend's house or take it into work and hook up to the network. And, that was, we were playing, I think, Quake back then.
Mm-hmm.
That was paradise to me. You took it with you. Wasn't quite as portable as they are now.
No.
But you didn't have to worry about the latency issue.
Hey, but now Halo launches and doesn't have co-op at all, so it's way better now. But yeah, I think that's pretty much going to wrap things up for today, unless you had anything else to add.
No, I think that's it.
So maybe in another year or 6 months, we'll come back with another update on this acquisition because they're clearly going to drag it out as long as they can. I want to thank you all so much for listening. Once again, I want to plug the show notes again. The show subscriptions, rather. Make sure you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast. We will be there for you. If you have any comments on today's show, you can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at insights_things. Twitch, where we are live right now. If you've got Amazon Prime, that means you have Twitch Prime. Make sure you give us that Twitch Prime sub, twitch.tv/insightsintothings. On Facebook, facebook.com/insightsintothings, at insightsintothings on Instagram. And of course, all these links can be found on our website, insightsintothings.com. Thank you all so much for listening. For Joe Whalen, for me, Sam Whalen. Have a great day, everybody.
Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow, where we take a deeper look into how the issues of today will impact the world of tomorrow. From politics and world news to media and technology, we discuss how today's headlines are becoming tomorrow's reality.
Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow. This is episode 18, Artificial Intelligence. I'm your host, Joseph Whalen, and my co-host, Sam Whalen.
Hey, everybody. You believe we've done 18 of these?
18, wow. We're on a roll.
Wow. We'll get to 100 in no time.
Yeah, we kind of have fallen off of our cadence of monthly podcasts on this, haven't we?
There's just nothing to talk about.
Yeah. Well, that's what happens when you steer away from all the controversial topics.
Exactly.
So this week we're going to talk about a nice safe topic, and that is artificial intelligence.
No dire implications with that.
So you know how this one's going to end. Folks. So is the future of AI more like HAL 9000, Skynet, and The Matrix? Or is it more like WALL-E, Star Trek's Commander Data, or C-3PO from Star Wars? Some of the world's most brilliant minds, like Michio Kaku and Stephen Hawking, recognize the tremendous potential for artificial intelligence, but also offer words of caution at its development. Is artificial intelligence the next step in our evolution, or the first step in our ultimate destruction? How will AI impact humans? How will AI impact what humans create? And could humans be entirely removed from the creative process? That's what we'll be discussing on today's episode of Insights into Tomorrow. But before we do that, I'd like to take a moment to invite our listening and viewing audience to subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Tomorrow. You can find both audio and video versions of all the network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things. And we can be found anywhere you get a podcast these days: Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, etc. I would also encourage you to write in, give us your feedback, tell us how we're doing, give us suggestions on what you'd like us to talk about. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. You can find us on Twitter at insights_things, or on Facebook at facebook.com/insightsintothingspodcast. Are we ready?
Yep, let's get into it.
Let's go. So what is artificial intelligence? So John McCarthy, head of computer science department at Stanford University in 2007, defined artificial intelligence as the science and engineering of making intelligent machines, especially intelligent computer programs. It's related to the similar task of using computers to understand human intelligence, but AI does not have to confine itself to methods that are biologically observable.
Like a brain.
Exactly. And this is kind of a different approach to artificial intelligence than what has traditionally been the measure of artificial intelligence. And that was really something called the Turing test that was created by Alan Turing back in the 1950s. So the Turing test basically said if it's observable and convincing enough to be a human, the test basically was two people having a conversation, a third party watching that conversation, and if the third party watching that conversation, it's all text-based, can't distinguish the AI for the human, then it's passed the Turing test. So kind of a loose definition of what AI was back at the time there. So it was basically how well it could emulate a human being. But I think AI has changed significantly in that time, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have to, change what we define it as well. It's not just text based. It can do way more than that now. It's expanded, pretty exponentially since then.
So what is a modern take on artificial intelligence?
So we have some information here from Stuart Russell, professor of computer science at the University of California, Berkeley, and Peter Norvig. I apologize, Peter, if I mispronounce your name there. He's the director of research for Google, published Artificial Intelligence, A Modern Approach. It became one of the leading textbooks, I believe this is Norvig's book, in the study of AI. In it, they delve into 4 potential goals or definitions of AI, which differentiates computer systems on the basis of rationality and thinking versus acting. So we have the human approach, systems that think like humans, systems that act like humans as well, and the ideal approach, systems that think rationally, and then systems that act rationally. Turing's definition would have fallen under the category of systems that act like humans. And there's a little bit more here that I'm going to keep reading. I didn't realize that was part of it. At its simplest form, artificial intelligence is a field which combines computer science and robust data sets to enable problem solving. Basically, we're making these things as a sort of extra brain to help us out. It also encompasses subfields of machine learning and deep learning, which are frequently mentioned in conjunction with artificial intelligence. These disciplines are comprised of AI algorithms, which seek to create expert systems which make predictions or classifications based on that input data.
So AI right now, some of the biggest things in AI right now probably are algorithms. You have the famed Google algorithm for searches, and they apply it to YouTube. And is the algorithm itself that basically looks at usage patterns and what you're doing, and then to
have more things like that? Or it happens to me all the time.
Type of artificial intelligence as well. But how intelligent are they really?
Not very.
Yeah, that's kind of like none of them are thinking on their own. They all require some level of input. They all require some source of data that they go out and get. Like if you ask the Amazon devices for information on something, they'll come back and tell you a Google contributor added this. So they don't even seem to compile their own set of knowledge. So it's almost like the it's more of an interface to the web than it is really an artificial intelligence. It might be an intelligent way to interface with it, but we're not talking HAL 9000.
Right. It's not learning and adapting necessarily.
Right. And it can't take its own actions or anything like that. You know, when we get into stuff like that, we might be looking at something like a Tesla or a self-driving car, where it takes input from outside sensors and has the ability to make decisions on its own at that point in time.
Right.
That's where we tend to get a little bit more down the rabbit hole of how dangerous things could be.
Yeah, once you start getting into the territory, we transition out of this into our next segment of more developed intelligence, of where that could possibly go once something starts thinking for itself.
Right. So let's take a quick break. We'll come back and we'll dig a little bit deeper into the types of artificial intelligence that are out there. We'll be right back.
For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com.
Welcome back to Insights into Tomorrow. We are talking artificial intelligence today. So and I don't want to go through every line that we have here, just kind of throw a few things out there. So the types of artificial intelligence that we're really kind of referring to here can be broken into two categories. One's capabilities and the other's functionalities. So under your capabilities, you've got narrow AI. And an example of narrow AI is sort of like what we talked about with Siri, where, you know, it's also referred to as weak AI. It focuses on a narrow task. You could even classify IBM's Watson that was used for chess playing in something like this as well. It's not robust. It's not thinking on its own. You then get into your general AIs, and your general AIs tend to be a little bit more sophisticated. These are your strong AIs. You can understand and learn intellectual tasks that humans can do. So you're getting a little bit smarter with these, but the requirements from a hardware standpoint, you need a supercomputer. You know, the couple that are listed here are two of the fastest supercomputers in the world in order to accomplish this.
Yeah, and do we know what these? We have the Fujitsu K. Do you know what those are used for? Like what type of computing we're using these like intense supercomputers for?
Most of these are being used for simulating weather, simulating nuclear explosions without actually having to fire them off. So
Oh, that's helpful.
they're highly complicated and powerful devices just to get this next level of AI.
Mhm.
And then the last level of AI from a capability standpoint is what's referred to as super AI. This is where AI, you know, this is your Skynet. This is where it surpasses human intelligence. None exist at this point in time, thankfully. But is this the direction that we're going as we're seeing this natural progression? Are we going to see super AIs?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I want that. And then you get into like the Blade Runner discussion of like what makes something human. When you give something a will of its own, like what we're getting into like deep sci-fi territory here. But I don't know if we would ever get to that point. If you know, what would we need something like that for? I mean, maybe to like run a city, like monitor trains and public works and stuff like that on like a city level. I don't know what we ever need something that smart for, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I could certainly see from an infrastructure standpoint, you know, most of what we do now, you know, you've got positive train controls, a great example you just mentioned with trains, where if the human operator fails to make certain checks, the computer can kick in and run things safely or shut the system down safely. So there's lesser versions of that now, but I think seeing something like that on a grand scale might be something where a super AI would work. What about functionality-based AIs? Tell us about that.
So we've got the reactive machine. Reactive machine is the primary form of AI that does not store memories or use past experiences to determine future actions. It only works in the present. So an example of this would be IBM's Deep Blue chess playing computer. That thing's really cool, by the way.
Yeah.
I've seen some videos of that. It's really neat.
Gary Kasparov would differ from that.
We've also got limited memory AI, which trains from the past to make decisions. They do have a memory, but it's very short-lived. And an example of this would be used in self-driving vehicles, like we mentioned, Teslas, things like that. And then finally, we have theory of the mind. On this show, we like to say theater of the mind. That's kind of like that. Theory of the mind AI represents an advanced class of technology and exists only as a concept. They would require thorough understanding of the people and the things within an environment, including understanding feelings and behaviors. There's no examples because they don't exist, but attempts at mimicking human emotion in automatons is as close as we can get.
One of the things regarding that is that people are trying to experiment with this, and and they're doing it through the same type of training that they're using for Chat GPT and the other AI engines that are out there. We'll talk more about those in a little bit. But what they're doing is they're having human beings emulate emotions, facial expressions of emotions, sadness, happiness, that type of thing. And they're having multiple iterations of people doing these. They're sticking them in a database, and then they're having a computer look at these and interpret them. So just by facial expressions, they're trying to get computers to understand emotions. How effective do you think that would be? How effective would it be for you to have no other communication method whatsoever, but just be able to see someone's face? Do you think that they would be able to convey emotions accurately enough?
I don't know. It would depend on how they're measuring it, right? Like if you're looking at like specific muscle movements for like a frown versus a smile, but everybody expresses emotion in different ways. So you'd have to have some kind of baseline to do that. And I forget the name of it. We learned it in college, but it's that thing where you show us an image of a guy's face, and it's that effect where you can interpret it however you want. Like it's the same face over and over again, but if you interpret it as in he's happy, you can kind of see it, or he's sad, you can kind of see it. And so I wonder where you get into something like that, where it's like it's sort of a gray area of, well, is this person really happy? That's when you have to go back to the baseline of if we're measuring facial tics or
Right.
certain, I don't know, visual ratios on your face.
Yeah, and I agree. And like, I don't know if I, as a person who doesn't need artificial intelligence, would be able to accurately understand emotions.
Right.
And then I look at the technology that we've had with facial recognition already, and some of the challenges we've had, where you had, for instance, Microsoft's camera technology that they had on their Xbox series. When that came out, not that many years ago, they only used Caucasian people to train it. And as people with darker skin, Asians, African Americans, and so forth, started using it, the technology didn't hold up.
Right.
And it was because of the way that the technology itself was developed and trained and
The foundation of it.
exactly. So it's like, if you can't get that right, then I have a very difficult time thinking you're going to get emotions.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? You get into like user error at that point. If you're trying to emulate human behavior, but you don't account for the whole world, how are we going to apply this in any
Right.
practical sense?
Right. And that's why you'd almost have to think you need multiple forms of input: voice inflection, body movement, the micro tics that people have. I could certainly see you coming up with enough data points that you could infer what emotions are, but you need to have those data points there, and it has to be more sensors than just trying to read someone's face.
Yeah, and do we need this? Why would we need this?
Right. And that's another point. One of the implementations that people have talked about with this is customer service. They had the one hotel in Tokyo that didn't last very long, that the front desk was entirely run by automaton.
I'm sure that was a blast.
And it was because they didn't want. They thought the automatons would interact better with people than people would, which I'm not really sure why you would think that. But the problem you run into is you get into that uncanny valley scenario where people are just creeped out by it. It looks enough like a human to make you think it is, but not enough to know it is. So it made people feel very uncomfortable. But I could see in a situation like that where you're implementing emotional stuff, detection, where you want to know if someone's angry. You know, do I really need to get a manager? Are you like stuff like that where you're interacting with people?
I could see that.
It's funny that they're exploring that path now when you have grocery stores that are doing away with their self-checkout because people dislike not having a human to deal with at a register now. So it's like, I don't know if it's a cultural thing, if it's a regional thing or what, but it seems people are kind of finicky.
Yeah, I don't know. And also, it's like, is it cost effective to build a robot to talk to people than to just hire someone for minimum wage to work at the front desk?
Right. That's a
And
very good
I know
point.
the argument is that, well, the robot could do it for forever, whereas we have to worry about this person, you know, their livelihood, and, you know, they need to go to the bathroom, take a break, things like that. Robots don't have to do that. But it's like, I mean, come on.
You don't have to contribute to a 401k with robots either.
Exactly. Yeah, you just got to swap out a few parts every once in a while.
Right.
So I don't know. And the practicality is where I get hung up on of how are we really going to use these things, and are they going to be worth the effort and time we're putting in to try to figure it out?
I agree, and I think it's almost like it's a fun school project people are working on. But you know, the golden ring or the prize of artificial intelligence, at least as far as sci-fi tells us, is self-awareness. Self-awareness is where the AI, they only exist hypothetically right now, and only in science fiction for the most part.
Yeah.
But these are the types of systems that can understand internal traits and states and conditions and perceive human emotions. And these machines are smarter than the human mind, which is really what's terrifying, I think, to a lot of people. They'll be able to understand and evoke emotions in those it interacts with, but it'll also have its own emotions, its needs, its beliefs. You know, this is where we get into things like a HAL 9000 from 2001 or Skynet or something like that. I don't know if anyone's shooting for self-awareness. Is self-awareness possible with today's technology?
I was actually just thinking about that because, like, you have in here about it having its own emotions and needs, and I think it would be more terrifying if it didn't have emotions, if it was purely logical, right? Because, you know, you make a AI and it instantly determines that humans are bad for the planet and decides to wipe us out.
Right.
Because, like, I mean, we could make that conclusion, but we're also, you know, we are humans. We're not going to wipe ourselves out, you know, intentionally. So it's like, I don't know if we would get to the point where that's possible. I don't know. I obviously don't know anything about programming, but how would we program emotion? I guess, you know, you're seeing the baby steps with this facial recognition software, but at what point are we able to program emotions? Is it something like using a human brain as the blueprint? I have no idea where this would go, but it sounds like fantasy, but one that is close enough to reality that, you know, maybe, but I just don't know how they would do it.
And you make a very valid point there. I think humans in general have a very difficult time dealing with emotions, recognizing emotions, and coping with them already. I don't know how you would possibly translate that into software.
No, I think it would have to be, you can't, I mean, it's all math based, right? So you can't, that's the whole point of emotion. You can't quantify it, right?
Right.
Unless you measure like heart rate, I guess, if you're angry or sweating or, you know, biological reactions. But when it gets to the thinking about interpreting emotions, I just think it's too nebulous. And if we did have a self-aware AI, it would have to be, you know, maybe based off of personality, or it would just be purely logical.
So then we're talking something more along the lines of RoboCop, you know, where we take the ex-con and we stick his brain into the robot there, and that's the artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I was thinking that, or in Halo, if you guys are familiar with that, they use a human brain to then make an AI.
Right.
So the AI is like part human, kind of. something like that. But I don't think we can do that yet, and I don't know how we would.
And you know what? I think that's probably the biggest limiting factor right now, I think, is our computing power.
Yep.
You know, in order to produce the amount of computational power that the human brain has, you need the fastest supercomputer right now to even approach it. And I think until we get to, you know, real practical quantum computing, I don't think we have much of a hope of even reproducing that. People, I think, don't understand how remarkably capable the human brain is.
A lot going on.
Yeah, how fast it operates, how many different things it can do at one time. And computers just haven't gotten to that point yet. Yes, computers are very good at doing the same thing over and over again. And they're very good at doing math. But they're only that good because humans make them that good.
Yeah, and it's when you get that line of where what we're creating is superseding us that it's like, okay, well, maybe we've gone a little bit too far.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's a good point. We can take a quick break and we'll come back and talk about, is artificial intelligence dangerous in its current form and future forms? We'll be right back.
For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com.
So Elon Musk, wrote, the pace of progress in artificial intelligence, he says, I'm not referring to narrow AI, is incredibly fast. Unless you have direct exposure to groups like DeepMind, you have no idea how fast. It's growing at a pace close to exponential. The risk of something seriously dangerous happening is in the next 5-year time frame, 10 years at most.
Where was this quote from?
So this was from Elon Musk. I didn't see
Okay.
where the quote.
I just wanted to see if we were still in the window or not.
I didn't get a date on that, but I have to imagine we're pretty close to that window.
Any day now, the robot uprising is going to happen.
Well, the fact that he made cars that are self-driving and running people over and killing them tells me right now that AI actually physically is dangerous.
He can make himself sound smarter by just becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So, what do you think of that? I mean, I think there's a lot of scholars, there's a lot of scientists to talk about AI. Elon Musk is a guy who's neck deep in it. You know, he's building them. He's releasing them. You see what we do. You know, SpaceX has rockets that fly back to Earth and land themselves. Tesla has cars that can drive themselves and park themselves and stuff. So that's real practical AI that's in the world now. How serious do you think you take this kind of warning from Elon Musk?
Not that seriously. Just because I don't see any like real world application of this idea, right? I also don't know what DeepMind is, but it sounds very scary. But I just don't think. I don't know. I feel like we would be seeing more examples of it, other than the Teslas running people over and causing traffic. But that's just faulty hardware. That's not necessarily, the AI thinking for itself and choosing to kill all humans. That's a functionality issue, right? So I don't know. I don't think it would be this quick. I just think we would see more implementation of AI in our day-to-day lives for it to then turn into something dangerous. The most I could see it being is like an over-reliance on computers and AI instead, and when then they malfunction, then you have problems like the recent airport, the FAA systems went down, things like that, things where we have large scale operations being run by AI, and then the AIs break, and then we have a problem.
So Musk was quoted in a separate quote comparing AI to the dangers of the dictator of North Korea. Now, yes, it's Elon Musk, so there's a lot of
Take it with a big old grain of salt.
there's a lot of self-promoting, angles that he goes through here. But we've got artificial intelligence in machines that are capable of killing people, not designed to, but capable.
Right.
We also have it designed into devices that are designed to kill people. You've got Predator drones that are AI driven. You've got Tomahawk cruise missiles that are AI driven. You've got Phalanx Sea Whiz close-in war weapon systems on ships that are AI driven. These are machines that are built already to kill and are powered by AI. Are those potentially dangerous, or do you think we have enough control over those?
Well, I mean, they're weapons, right? So they're inherently dangerous. It would be more about, again, I just think, are we shooting for the notion of them like rising up and like actively trying to kill people? Because I think it would be much more realistic for them to just be taken over by another human, right? To have somebody hack into them, or to have them malfunction, and instead of targeting here, you're targeting somewhere else where you're not supposed to. I just don't think it would be the AI necessarily choosing to kill a bunch of people. I think instead it would be a malfunction.
So to paraphrase, we're hoping that it's humans that are the problem,
Right.
and not the AI that's
Exactly.
the problem.
And we can count on that.
Yeah, to a certain extent, that logic makes sense, because you can count on that human factor. Like, it's very likely that you would have a foreign entity attack our infrastructure here
Mhm.
before I think you would have an AI go rogue and shut down the power grid.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Like, you're not gonna, like, you talked about the Predator missiles. Like, the Predator missile's not gonna wake up one day and go, "Hey, I'm gonna go blow up that town." Someone's gonna have to tell it to go do that. We're not at the point where these things can like actively, pursue missions or pursue goals on their own unless they're told to by somebody else, like an operator.
So, all right, let's run with that for a second. So they're not going to rise up. You're not going to have a Skynet take over the world and nuke the entire world. But you have machines that are trusted to go do a job that may involve violence.
Mhm.
If those machines can then be usurped by a nefarious third party, and our trust in those machines allows them to continue to do their job, when they get usurped, we have a new target designation.
Right, exactly. And that's I think where you get into the real world danger of this. But I mean, that's our world in general has a heavy reliance on computers, right? And so I think that comes with the risk, right, of the ease of use and the scale of our operations. You need something like AI to run it, because it's not feasible for people to do it all the time. And I think that just comes with the territory of, if this is how we're going to run things, then there's a chance that someone could take it over. It's no different than, well, it's different, but we're reducing a little bit. But if you had a gun and someone took your gun and killed you with it, it's the same thing.
So AI is the tool.
Yeah.
It's not the intent.
For now, yeah.
Okay.
Until we get to the point where, we have a fleet of drones that are, flying around the globe just taking pot shots wherever they want, that are programmed. Well, I guess they wouldn't be programmed at that point. But I'm saying, like, instead of a fleet of jets flown by pilots, if it was a fully automated, a bunch of drones where they could all communicate and make their own decisions, once they get into that level of autonomy, that's when you're running into more of an AI-based issue, I think.
So Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, everyone's
We're getting all the banner people out here today.
He said at one point in time, artificial intelligence is the future, not only for Russia, but for all humankind. It comes with enormous opportunities, but also threats that are difficult to predict. Whoever becomes the leader in this sphere will become the ruler of the world.
That's a little extreme.
First off, do you agree with that?
I mean, I guess, because at that point, wouldn't you just have the strongest army too? If he says it's got enormous opportunity, right? So then by that logic, you would, unless
would
those
think, yeah.
those unpredictable threats like make it worse for you. I don't know. Like, I don't think it's any different than having the strongest standing army, right? And whoever has that, you're by default the most powerful, unless you control like the economy. That's different. But in terms of like military force, if you have a bigger or more effective army, yeah, you're gonna be more powerful, right?
So, do you think that in order to combat nations, like assuming Russia's gearing up towards
Right.
artificial intelligence, do you think the only way to combat nations like that is with your own artificial intelligence?
I think so. I mean, that's how these things usually go, right? Like an AI arms race, which, hey, sci-fi authors out there, that's a free title. But yeah, I just think it's gonna, and you're gonna dig yourself into a hole, right? Because the more we go into this AI route, the more you're getting into these threats that are difficult to predict, like he's talking about. So the further we go with this technology, the more we're getting on that edge of accidentally making something that could either get its own intelligence or something that is more likely to be, like you said, usurped and used against the whatever country's making it.
Okay. Now we're talking AI in actual active weapons there, but there's potential danger elsewhere too. What about social manipulation? What do you think AI could do from a social manipulation standpoint? I mean, so far we've had social media. I don't want to say usurped because it's being used as it's designed.
Right.
But you've had situations where you've got Facebook and the whole Cambridge Analytics, and you've got Twitter trying to, all the Twitter files coming out now telling us how people try to manipulate elections and stuff. Where do you think AI falls in there? Is AI, is that algorithm as you go through your social feed? Is that AI manipulating you in such a way that it could be dangerous?
Absolutely. And I think that this is where you get into the things that are much more real world dangers, right? Especially when it comes to things like social media, you run into that echo chamber issue where you're only hearing ideas and things that reinforce what you think. So you never hear anybody else's ideas, for better or worse. But generally, I think that's a bad thing. I think that you should be able to, see ideas from everybody and then interpret them how you want. But when you get into this with social media where you're seeing the same things over and over again, it just reinforces your own beliefs and makes you double down. And it makes everybody closed-minded and more isolated from each other and more extreme in their beliefs, too, in certain situations. So I think when you're getting into things like that, and like you said, the Cambridge Analytica thing where it's straight-up manipulation of people, I think when those have real-world consequences, which they did and still do, I think that's much more dangerous than worrying about a drone going rogue or something like that.
Well, surely manipulating the mindset of common citizens isn't something that's unique to AI. I mean, the Nazi Germany had an entire propaganda ministry that was designed to do that. You've had this type of thing that was driven by humans for hundreds of years now. What does AI bring to the plate that makes it any more dangerous than just humans doing this type of activity?
I think it's the scale and the pace of it, right? So AI is very good at learning. That's what it does, or at least whatever. I'm talking about the algorithm in social media.
Right.
It's good at learning what you do, what you look at, and I think it can do it at a pace and with an effectiveness that humans just can't do, or can't do as fast, or on such a big of a scale. I mean, a human could look at what you do on Twitter, what you click on, what you like, but it would take them much longer to figure out, okay, well, what should I serve them next in their timeline that they'll click on, versus an AI looking at it and figuring it out like that. So I think it just makes it more effective and efficient, honestly.
That's a very good point. So the other one that they talk about is invasion of privacy and social grading. I don't know if we've never really talked about social grading in the past here. It's being done in some Asian countries already, where depending on what your reputation in social media is how you're treated in society. But I've seen this in sci-fi as well, where it's extremely emphasized in how people treat you. But from an invasion of privacy, you brought up a very good point of, well, everything's listening, and if I say something, I start getting advertisements. Is that a bad thing that you get targeted advertising?
I think it depends on how you look at it. I know people that feel like they're being manipulated. They'd rather it be not targeted and just give me what I want.
Well, that's what targeted advertising is they give you what they
Right.
think you want, without targeted advertising, you're just going to get a bunch of crap thrown at you there. I mean, is that really a bad thing that you get targeted advertising?
I think when you like the people that have issues with it, I think they see it as of being manipulated. That even if it's something I want,
Well, advertising is manipulative.
it's true, which is why it's
That's
so
the
effective.
definition of advertising.
I know. I just think it's like, I think people have an issue with it because it's that invasion of privacy of, even in my own home, I'm being sampled for data and it's being regurgitated back at me so I can become a better consumer. You know, like it eventually it just feels like it's all boiling down to you just pumping money into you know the economy.
Okay, I'll buy that.
It is effective though if you're a business owner.
Absolutely.
From a capitalist standpoint, it's great.
Yeah, exactly. One of the other ones they talk about is misalignment between our goals and the machines. And this one, I don't know how much of a problem this was. The great example they give is you get into a self-driving cab and you say, get me to the airport as quickly as possible. Okay. But if the machine itself is doing what it thinks you've asked it to do, that could involve exceeding the speed limit. It could involve dangerous driving. It could involve driving into the river that's between you and the airport to try to get you there. I think this is kind of a silly
Yeah.
example of, you know, I mean, this is no different than people following their GPSs off the road, you know. Is this something we need to worry about where if we're putting our lives in the hands of these machines at some point in time, and you know, they're already talking about having air taxis to the airport and stuff like that. So you're ramping up the level of complexity and the level of danger associated with the reliance on these machines. Is it possible that somebody misses a line of code that says stop at stop signs? Like, is that a danger?
I mean, not really, right? If these things are being put out on a global scale, surely they would test them, right, and see if that's an issue. You've had some issues with this with self-driving cars where they have malfunctions, where they'll, you know, I saw one the other day where a Tesla was in like a tunnel and just stopped, and I don't know why, and then like 8 cars hit it. So things like that will happen, but I think if you're talking about like the foundation of the code getting out there, that's something's wrong with it, I don't really think you have to worry about that. I feel like it would be extremely irresponsible of whatever company is making it to put it out there, not having it be fully vetted, especially when you're getting into like transportation and things like that.
There was one example of a Tesla that was driving on a highway at high speed, which they supposedly excel at. They're very good at that because that's how the sensors work best and the computer works best and everything.
Going fast?
On a highway
Oh, okay.
situation where they're not doing stop and go traffic a lot. And what happened was there was a vehicle that was in the left lane that this thing was driving in, and it wasn't expecting a vehicle. It wasn't expecting a stationary target. And because they use LiDAR and they use radar, and they'll gauge the distance between themselves and the next machine. And the assumption is that machine's going to be moving so we can make calculations based on timing. And what happened was this vehicle was stopped in the left-hand lane. The device, the smart car, saw that the machine was there. But because it wasn't moving, it assumed that it was a glitch in the sensor, never tried to hit the brakes, and literally accelerated right through the vehicle. And it did everything it was supposed to do based on the rules that it had. And someone had missed a rule that said, hey, there's a chance that something could be stopped in your lane. You have to stop for it.
Yep.
And that got out there after all this extensive testing. That still got out there into production. So there's a chance that you can get code that's broken out there.
That's true.
How do you deal with that? Who's liable at that point in time?
I mean, probably the company still, right? I mean, it's still their self-driving car that rammed into it. I think the onus is still on them. Even if it's something that they could never predict, then don't make the technology. If there's a chance that something like this could happen, then maybe it's just not meant to be. Or we just go through the trial and error of, you know, potentially people losing their lives until we figure it out and put out enough software updates, if you want to look at it in like a morbid sense. But I mean, there's things
that could be a high attrition rate.
That's
there.
what I'm saying. Like, I just think maybe at a certain point, if the body count gets high enough before you get version 4.0, maybe we just don't do it. Maybe we just stick to driving ourselves around, or we limit it to, you know, certain public transportation options instead of every consumer having their own self-driving car.
And that's certainly a consideration to solve some of these things. And the last danger I wanted to talk about was discrimination. You know, we had already kind of talked about this to a certain extent with
The social grading.
the social grading and with the malfunction of the Microsoft camera system for minorities. How do you think this would have an impact on society itself from a discrimination standpoint? Either facial recognition AI. We had one situation very recently in our area here where somebody was arrested and held for, I think, 48 hours based on a facial recognition that was completely wrong. So it's already happening. Is that a danger that we need to be aware of? Is there checks and balances that can be put in place? Should we not be relying on AI for this type of thing?
I mean, yeah, no, we should not be. if this is gonna happen, yeah, I mean, sure, there's mix up with, you know, people getting held when they're not supposed to, and that's an issue for another day of, you know, the justice system and things like that. But I think that when it comes to things like this, where you're affecting people's lives, you should probably have a double check system or like a backup to be like, okay, well, the robot figured it out, but let's just use our own eyes and see if this is the guy.
Well, and I see something like this being used extensively in high traffic areas, airports, right? So you want to be safe going through the airport, but you want to be expeditious in moving people through. So a lot of things that we do, we rely on technology to accomplish that. If you get a certain failure rate of that system itself, is that tolerable, or should that be 100% accurate?
That's a good question. I mean, if you're going to be the 99% effective and you get that 1%, there still needs to be a human element so that person isn't held for 3 days because they got the wrong person. Like, there needs to be, you know, if someone gets pulled up on facial recognition, someone needs to look at it and you know, or you know, have that person come and I'm just saying there needs to still be a human element. We can't let it totally be run by the machines if they're not going to be 100% accurate.
So you need a path of resolution that
Yeah.
is human involved. And I have my own story. You know, there was about 2-3 years ago, I got a ticket at the mail for a vehicle that I didn't even own. And it came back as a red light camera somewhere in North Jersey, which I knew I'd never even been to the town. It was like Amboy or something like that. So they send it with a picture, and you look at the picture, and there's a link to the video for it, and you look at the video, and it had, 5 characters, 6 characters on a license plate? It had all the characters on a license plate that I hadn't had of the vehicle in 20 years. And that plate was originally registered to me, but there was a glitch either on the camera or on the plate. You couldn't read one of the digits in the middle. So the AI just assumed that it was my plate, generates a ticket, and sends the ticket out to me, and I get an order to appear in court. That's AI-driven problems that you have that should have been looked at by a human being. But because of the number of tickets that they produce, you can't. The whole point of having an automated system is because you can't have a human looking at all these things. However, to your point, I was able to call them up, explain to them what it was. They were able to resolve the ticket on the phone, and I didn't have to go for the court appearance. So that system at least had that path to resolution, whereas I think as long as we have that in place, we're safe. But do you want to be that guy that they make that mistake with?
No, and that's the territory, right? If we're going to rely on these things, and it's like, you know, it's something similar to getting on a plane or something where you're giving up a amount of control for convenience or for, convenience, honestly. If you're going to give up that element of what you can control, then there's a risk that comes with that, no matter what it is. And I think that this is an example of that.
That just sounds like a really poor way of explaining the way airplane crashes.
Hey, man, you get on the plane, you got to expect it, all right?
We expect the least expected.
I bring a parachute every time I travel.
All right. I think we've kind of exhausted where we can go wrong with AI at this point from a danger standpoint. Let's take our last break and we'll come back and we're going to talk about the impact of AI on our world today and moving forward. We'll be right back.
For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com.
Welcome back to Insights into Tomorrow, and thank you to today's sponsor, the Second Sith Empire.
Really paid for all that airtime, huh?
They are an awesome guild. I recommend everyone look them up. Anyway, moving right along.
Hit it one more time.
Anyway, so let's look at what the impact of AI on the world today. So some quick figures I dug up here from simplylearn.com. So the revenue from artificial intelligence software market worldwide is expected to reach $126 billion by 2025. That's significant. Not huge, but significant. Gartner predicts 37% of organizations have implemented AI in some form.
I thought they'd be higher.
I would have too. The percentage of enterprises employing AI grew 270% over the last 4 years. And according to Servion Global Solutions, by 2025, 95% of customer interactions will be powered by AI.
So we got 2 years to figure that out.
That's right. And a recent 2020 report from Statista reveals the global AI software market is expected to grow approximately 54% year over year and is expected to reach a forecast size of 22.6 billion. Which doesn't really make sense because the other one was 126.
Sure does. Hey man, data's weird. They all got different conclusions.
It's numbers, right?
Don't worry about it.
I think the conclusion here is that AI is very much embedded in our lives now. Are we better off for that, or are we worse off for that?
Oh, that's a good question. We've looked at like every aspect of AI, and I think it's good in some aspects, right? We're taking the load off of humans if we can run things with an AI just to make our lives a little bit easier. I think that's a good thing because at a certain point, when we're talking about things on a global scale, it's just not practical to expect humans to be able to run all that 24/7. But then when you get into the more dangerous aspects of social manipulation, we're about to get into the discussion of how it affects creative endeavors. I think that's when you start getting into the dangerous territory, and it's really going to be a question of where does this go in the next 5 to 10 years? Are we getting that full on AI integration in every day of our lives, or is it still like it is now, where it's more in the background? It's not necessarily as prominent.
And I agree. I think we're very, very much on the cusp of something significant here. I think we're kind of nipping around the edges right now until we get deeper into it. Some of the special projects that I did want to talk about, one that's in the news now, is ChatGPT. Their tagline is optimizing language models for dialogue. And this is a chatbot that is human-like interactions. You can ask it things, it'll answer them. One of the things, this happens to actually be something that I had directed my developers at the office to dig into a little bit. One of the functions that I see with this is helping to automate and personalize communication for our sales force. So the concept that we had come up with a few years back, and the technology wasn't there yet, was our salespeople know their customers. So the salespeople can go in and drop in notes. Tom likes the Phillies. His wife's name is this. His kids' names are this, and they're going to these college. They can put in this metadata about the person, And eventually, the idea was to have this technology that could take this metadata and write a monthly email to each one of your customers that's personalized, that might have specific information as far as offers that we might have, but it looks like it's coming from you. And we want to write these, hand them off to the salesperson, let the salesperson read it and okay it, and then send it out. And we're literally within months of being able to have the system start writing emails like that. Is that, in your opinion, is that a viable, good way of using AI, or are we stealing some of the human element there? Are we muddying the waters?
I mean, it depends on how much you care about these handwritten or emails. You know, these personalized emails. If you're okay sacrificing the human element of it, then it's fine. It still has the human element, right? The salespeople still have to know their customers. They still have to know
Exactly.
the things that make it personal, and they still okay before it's sent off. I think that's fine. Yeah, I don't really have any issues with that.
But if I have a salesperson who doesn't compose emails very well, is it ethical for them to use this system to compose their emails for them, or is it the same as having an assistant doing it for you, or is it different because it's AI?
That's a good question. It's like cheating on homework, kind of.
Right.
But I mean, in the real world, you're not like, I don't know. It's cheating on homework in the real world isn't as big of a deal as it is in high school. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you got to make these sales, right? So if you're not good at writing emails, first off, I don't know how far you would have gotten as a salesperson. But second, it's like a tool. I think in this instance, it's like another tool to use. If emails aren't your thing, but when you're in one-on-one interactions, you can make the sale. Good for you. You can use this as a tool. If you are relying on this to do your job for you, that's a little bit different, right? If you're relying on it to make sales pitches for you and to reach out to customers, and you're kind of just sitting back and maybe putting in a few inputs, then you're relying on it too much, and it's becoming an issue because you're not doing the work.
So it's just a matter of pacing how much you use the tool.
Yeah, and implementation.
So the next one I wanted to talk about was Canva. So Canva is a AI-based image generating software out there, and there's a number of them out there now. And you basically give it text input and say, give me a picture done up like Van Gogh of a horse in a rainbow. And it'll go out there and it'll source thousands of different images, and it'll come back and it'll generate what's considered an original image for you, so you don't have to make it yourself. But that image itself is a compilation of all these other works. Is that something that is going too far, or are there any moral implications to that we have to worry about?
Yeah, this is actually the whole reason I wanted to do this episode was things like this. I know we covered the doom and gloom of AI taking over the world, but this is where I think it really is. It strikes a chord with me of it's essentially making like art sausage, but like if you didn't make any of the components of the sausage to begin with, you kind of just put it in the blender and called it your own. It's really devaluing art and the human element of it. And when people feel that they can get this app and make art like with no effort, it kind of defeats the purpose of it in general. There's also Lensa, which is similar to it. And I had an article linked here where there was cases where you could see artist signatures on the final product, what Lensa would create, because it was just stealing artwork from other people. And that's how a lot of these AI work, is that you put in what you want and it scours the internet and will take from other artists' pages, usually without permission. It just kind of steals it and then, incorporates it back into itself and spits it out for you. But you feel like you've made this, and you really haven't. You didn't do any. I mean, you don't know how to do digital art or anything like that. It's like putting it on easy mode. But also the bigger thing is stealing from the people that did make something, and I really think it's an issue.
So let me ask you something, and we'll kind of go down the moral path here. If I don't have any artistic ability whatsoever, but I need to come up with a picture, and let's say I need a picture of a tree, and I don't know how to make a picture of a tree, so I'm going to go out and I'm going to look at other people's samples, and I'm going to find one that I really, really like, and then I go and I kind of try to recreate that as my image of a tree. Is that the same moral ambiguity as what a Canva is doing? Because Canva had the same problem. They wound up getting sued by Getty Images.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
because they weren't even pulling the watermarks out.
Oh,
It was so
man.
bad. Is me using someone else's inspiration to make my own different than these AIs going out there and grabbing these? Because they don't always take a one-to-one image. They may take portions of an image, almost like sampling a track in music, and then they assemble it together from multiple different sources. What's the difference in the two of those?
Well, I think, in your example, I'm assuming you're like drawing it yourself. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. That's the thing. That's where I think the line is. With the AI generated art, you're just typing in what you want and it just appears, and it's compiled from other images. With the inspiration, you are taking inspiration from that thing that somebody else made and then making your own interpretation of it. Even if it's not very good, you still put in the time and the work to make it something original, even if it's inspired by something else. Like you said, with sampling music, you can take a sample from another song that somebody else made, but then you incorporate that section of it and you make a whole new thing out of it. It's its own thing, even if it's borrowing from something else. And I think that's kind of where the line is drawn.
That's a good point. The other thing with Lensa is Lensa has one of the big functions Lensa adds is what they're called their magic correction. So you take a picture of someone, you run it through the Lensa filtering. You have the filters with Snapchat and stuff like that that can make the googly eyes and all that crazy stuff that you can do. Is the AI that's doing that different, or do you take exception to that from a creative standpoint when it's taking your art and enhancing it because maybe you don't have the technical capabilities to do that?
I mean, that's a good question. It's similar to, photoshopping an image, right, or using a filter on Instagram, where it's not authentically the thing, but it's, I don't know. As long as you still made it from the beginning, I think it's a little bit better than just straight up stealing the art. But I still think it's messing with the authenticity of it, right? And it gets into our perception of what is made by humans and what is made by AI, and what does that mean for art if we can't tell the difference. And I think that's sort of the road we're going down at this point. When it gets into the enhancement, it's not as bad. It's still not great.
Well, and I'll counter that and say if you can't tell the difference between whether it's man-made or machine-made, isn't that really the ultimate goal of AI at that point, is to make it indistinguishable from human hands?
Well, that's the scary part, right? Because if you can't tell the difference, but it still stole a bunch of other people's art, then it is actively devaluing all the art that it just stole from, even if you can't tell the difference. Even if you don't know that it took from, 10 other artists to make this, it still happened, right? And it's still, even if it's indistinguishable, the consequences of it are still real.
So the dilemma that you're referring to here is more the sourcing of where it gets its material from, rather than the generation of that material.
Right, because it's not magic, right? Like the AI is not making it is. It's not like physically drawing it, I mean, but it's not necessarily entirely originally from the mind of the AI. It's taking from other people to make it, and that's kind of where the issue is.
So it's just creative copying.
Yeah.
So all right, let me ask you this. If you were an artist and you had a vast portfolio of your own artwork and you use that solely to power your AI, and you decided that you're going to recreate your art in the AI style, is that legitimate?
Yeah, as long as it's only taken from your stuff. Like if that's things that you made that are, I'm not going to get into the legal aspect of it. I'm not a lawyer, but if you can guarantee that it's only pulling from your art and you are totally signing off on it, then yeah, that's fine. It gets into it when it's taking other people's art without their consent or knowledge.
So, all right, being a Star Wars fan and a Eagles fan, let me throw a couple examples of non-AI out there where both of those entities have taken what they've had, they've modified those and regurgitated it back out to the public strictly for money purposes. There wasn't anything to enhance the art. There wasn't anything to make it better or different or really anything. It was literally, I just want more money, so I'm going to re-release it. Do you have a moral issue with that, with people basically exploiting their own material for money there, trying to, I'm going to say, con people out of buying it again, because I'm one of those idiots who
I was
does
gonna
it.
say, yeah. Not really. No. I mean, morally, yeah, it's not ideal, right? Like you shouldn't be scamming people, but these things have value, and there's a reason that they're getting the money that they are. They wouldn't be re-releasing if they weren't making money. But it's not like fundamentally impacting how we view art, right? It's just someone making a quick buck because they're re-releasing their greatest hits for the 1,000th time. It's not like, it would be like if the Eagles released a record that was music that was all samples and they didn't credit anybody. Like, that is what we're talking about here. But everybody loved it and acted like it was their original music.
So are we really to the point where Canva and ChatGPT and Lensa are making us fundamentally reconsider art at this point?
I think we're getting there. And I mean, I think the Lensa specifically, at least in my sphere, really took a lot of people by storm of like, this is awesome. Look how cool I look. I'm a cowboy. I'm a robot. But then it came out of how it really works, and everyone was like, oh, so it's not magic. It's not a computer making, like, it's not a computer coming up with this art itself. It's a computer interpreting other forms of art, stealing and chopping it up, and then mashing it into one new thing. And that was kind of where the issue came in. So I think it is, we're getting there. We're getting there, right? And I have, like a soapbox I wrote on here, but looking at things like the Indiana Jones 5 trailer, where it's a wholly digital younger Harrison Ford, and you really can't tell the difference. Like, we're now there where in movies these CGI creations are getting close enough where you can't really tell the difference. We're past the days of Rogue One where it's zombie Tarkin and all that.
That was terrible.
But we're getting to the point where the CGI creations or de-aging in movies is becoming so realistic that it's becoming legitimately hard to tell the difference. And it's, between that and the AI art generation, it's like, where is there room for people at this point, for the human touch of it all? And that's what really, interests me and kind of scares me.
So, for years now, before AI existed, before computer-generated graphics in movies and TV existed, people have been using makeup to make you look older or make you look younger. That never caused us to question the purpose of the place of art in the world. Why would de-aging someone digitally cause that kind of conflict in the art world now?
Well, because for makeup, like, you have to apply that, right? It's a physical thing you have to do. With this, it's less about the de-aging and more about the, like, making someone young again so you can make more movies with them. Like, Harrison Ford is like 80 years old. He can't be Indiana Jones like he was in the 80s. But if we can de-age him and, like, make him look young again, even though he's an old man in real life, we can keep making these movies and keep pumping them out. That's where I think the issue is. When you're doing old age makeup or trying to make someone look young with makeup, it's a little bit different because you still know underneath that makeup is still the person, right? Whereas with this, it's not. It's a robot.
So, okay, I will counter that with Chris Pine in Star Trek. So they didn't use makeup, they didn't use digital de-aging. They just changed the actor and they relaunched the entire franchise. So it happens. There's different methods of this happening in doing what they did, because they did the same thing with Luke Skywalker.
Yep.
Where they didn't even bring Mark Hamill in to play the role, or even to do the voice, because in Boba Fett, whatever, Book of Boba, or
the
Mando
Mandalorian
2.5,
Yeah.
or in that episode where he comes in, his voice is even digitally redone by an AI voice manipulating.
And now Darth Vader, James Earl Jones, is no longer the voice. It's all
Right.
signed over to AI.
So he signed it over, and they can generate James Earl Jones' voice through AI. I'm struggling to understand where the issue is with that.
I think when it comes to, we'll use James Earl Jones as the example. When you get into like a vocal performance, when you get into the human element of it, there are things that he might do when he does a read for the fifth take that he does something different, and it's way better, right? And it was a fluke, but hey, he read it this way, and that's the line we're going to use. When you get it with AI, I don't think they're going to be able to do like. There's that human element where you can get that random spark of creativity or performance that elevates a role more than it would just be if it was a human doing it. I think it's really that loss of the human element that I think is the dangerous part.
Well, and I think the ultimate goal of AI is to not have the human element injected into it, but have its own unique element injected into it. So I think you still have the potential for that. It didn't just have James Earl Jones record every word in the English dictionary and it just assembles them together like a really bad AI.
They should do that. That'd be pretty funny.
It basically recorded his inflections and his ability to say certain syllables. It was a much more sophisticated thing than just recording words. And then the AI assembles those sounds, but it doesn't do it the same way every time.
But like, isn't that weird? Like, James Earl Jones is still alive, right? And unfortunately, he's going to die one day. But they're still going to use that after he's dead to make Star Wars movies with Darth Vader. Isn't that weird? It's like putting him in the ghost in the machine.
You know what? They embalmed Lennon's body and they stuck it on display in the public square for decades.
Yeah, but they didn't Weekend at Bernie's him like a puppet in a movie after he was dead. Like, I don't know. It's something about like when it comes to real life people being like turned into AI generated things, whether it be the Harrison Ford in Indiana Jones 5 or James Earl Jones and now with Darth Vader. When you're taking real people that are in real life and harnessing them using AI for creative things, it doesn't sit right with me. It just seems strange. I don't know.
Well, and you know what? To play devil's advocate here, James Earl Jones wasn't just James Earl Jones who was the voice of Darth Vader. There was so much audio work that went into that voice that it wasn't just him talking into a microphone. So there was already more to it than just James Earl Jones. If they can get that out of a computer and James Earl Jones doesn't have to show up and he already got his paycheck.
Yeah, but like, sure, there are other elements, but his voice is still the core of it, right? So if he died in the world where we don't have AI, that'd be it.
So I will counter that argument with every other element, every other example of Star Wars that Darth Vader shows up in and it's voiced by someone beside James Earl Jones. It's not believable.
I don't know, man. We got to figure something out then. Like, at a certain point, you got to, like, the real world has to have some kind of impact. Like, we can't, like, I don't know. Was Carrie Fisher alive when they did that Rogue One thing? I think she was at the time, right? Like, that's so weird. It's so weird that these are real people that are aging, that we are just plucking, like, the best version of them and putting them in, like, CGI. And now with the voices is, like, eternalized. I don't know. It freaks me out.
Well, all right. So I'll give you a different angle on that. So you have, as an actor, especially a female actor, you have a finite lifespan that the industry will tolerate your aging to, right? So if you get to a point, let's say you're 50, okay? The number of roles that you run into when you're 50 are severely limited. If someone could extend their acting career and their opportunity to make money in the business by allowing digital manipulation of their features, don't you think that's at least a worthwhile endeavor for it?
Yeah, I guess, but like, do we just want to completely give in to like ageism and not try to fix it? Like, do we just want to submit to like the industry-wide like issue? I don't know. It just seems like we're compromising just to not have to like tackle the real problem head on.
Well, and I agree that it's a problem that needs to be tackled. But in the meantime, you're robbing people of opportunities if you take that tool away.
Yeah, but you're robbing them of opportunities by like being ageist too. So it's like
I agree, but the problem is a role may require somebody of a certain age to be convincing.
Wouldn't you be taking away opportunities from potentially another actress that is right for the part if we're going to instead use AI or robot Carrie Fisher instead of recasting someone that might be good at it?
It's possible, but if you were doing a Star Wars film that was after Rogue One and you needed Princess Leia in there. Now granted it's a little different because she's passed away. But if you needed someone that's age appropriate who was that actor, wouldn't it be easier and more convincing to age reduce that actor so they could do that role?
No.
Well, why not? Because then you'd wind up getting like somebody who looks nothing like Han Solo showing up in a Han Solo movie. Okay,
That's true. That movie had other problems. I think that was I don't know. We're not. This is not the Solo podcast, but I think I don't know. For me personally, I think it should be a recasting. I don't think it should be using AI. People cling, especially when it comes to Star Wars and properties like it. People cling to that past so hard. The past, what did Kylo Ren say? Kill it if you have to. Like, I think I don't know. We're getting like it's like the metatextual level of this, but I think like we can't just like keep digging up these people and putting them into computers and like Indiana
no,
Jones.
but you can. That's the point. You
that's
can.
that's the beauty of it. We can. We never have to move
Nobody
on.
has to die now.
No one's ever really gone. I don't know, man. I guess we'll see when Indiana Jones 5 comes out and they just make a whole movie with CGI Harrison Ford and call it a day.
Okay. So you
Hey, man,
went through-
support your local artist, all right, before the robots come for us all.
So that's really what you're getting at here. The risk that you're seeing here is that it could severely negatively impact actual artists with what.
Yeah, it's like the old auto factories, right? Once they figured out how to automate all that stuff, all those people got fired. If we can automate writing a script for a movie, the people that are in the movie, their voices, the effects, if we can automate all that stuff, we don't even need people anymore. And at a certain point,
So that's a twisted idea of what history is. When they automated factories, people, instead of doing menial, repetitive tasks, were trained to do better tasks. What killed auto factories were unions that kept trying to get more and more money for people. Okay, so let's just put history aside for a second there and not distort it that much.
it would still be the same outcome, though. With if we found a way to automate all this stuff, where people couldn't tell the difference, we wouldn't need people to do it anymore. And
No,
I think,
but instead of being a makeup artist, you become a digital effects artist.
what if they don't want to do that? What if they like makeup? They shouldn't be forced to
Work in stage, okay?
they go work at Walmart.
They're not digitally enhancing anybody on the stage in a play, okay?
Not yet. We have holograms.
You're killing me.